In 1985, a series of gruesome murders began in Los Angeles. The suspect moved around the city in a stolen car to find his victims. With each new attack, he used a different method of killing, which made it even more difficult for law enforcement to catch him. As the manhunt went on, the number of victims murdered with brutal methods kept rising by the day. Frightened people were buying firearms to protect themselves and installing additional locks on doors and windows. The shocked population could no longer distinguish where the line between paranoia and real danger lay. The city was in complete panic. Everyone was waiting in terror where and when the serial killer would appear and who would be his next victim. On March 17, 1985, the police in Rosemead, a city in Los Angeles County, received a report of a murder. When law enforcement arrived at the crime scene, they found the door of the house's garage open. There were blood traces on the door separating the garage from the living area, as well as all over the floor. Police found the body of 34-year-old Dale Yoshi Okazaki on the kitchen floor, with a fatal gunshot wound to the forehead. The murder had a witness, Maria Hernandez, who lived with the victim, Dale Yoshi Okazaki. She told the authorities that when she returned home, she opened the garage door with the remote control and went inside. As she inserted the key into the door, connecting the garage to the house, she heard a strange noise behind her. Turning around, she saw a man aiming a gun at her. Instinctively, Maria raised her hands, and at that moment, the attacker pulled the trigger. The bullet struck the key in her hand and ricocheted. To deceive the assailant, Maria dropped to the floor as if she were dead. The attacker moved her body aside and entered the house. Frightened, Maria quickly jumped up and ran toward the street, but at that moment she heard another gunshot. She remembered that Dale Yoshi Okazaki was still inside and turned back to help her. She circled the house to enter through the front door, hoping the attacker would come out through the garage again. But as she was about to enter the house through the front door, the door opened and the unknown attacker came outside. He was very surprised to see Maria Hernandez alive. Then he pulled out a gun and aimed at her. Maria told the authorities that, in desperation, he asked, "You've already shot me once, and are you going to do it again?" Suddenly, the attacker lowered his gun, turned around, and walked away calmly, disappearing. About 40 minutes after the murder of Dale Yoshi Okazaki, the Monterey Park Police Department received another report of a murder. This killing occurred just half a kilometer from Okazaki's house. The victim was a young Asian woman, Tsai Lian Yu, who was also known to acquaintances as Veronica. She was driving home when an unknown man signaled her to stop. As soon as the car stopped, the attacker forcibly dragged her out, forced her to her knees, and shot her twice in the chest. The investigation determined that the bullet was of the same caliber as the one used in the murder of Dale Yoshi Okazaki. However, since these murders were being investigated by different police departments, the detectives handling Tsai Lian Yu's case did not connect the two incidents. According to them, there were thousands of .22 caliber guns in the city, and it was possible that the crimes had been committed with different weapons. The investigation into Dale Yoshi Okazaki's murder was assigned to detectives Frank Salerno and Gil Carrillo. Salerno was a legendary detective whose tireless work had led to the capture of the Hillside Strangler in the late 1970s. Carrillo, on the other hand, was a former narcotics investigator, and this was his first murder case. According to Maria Hernandez, who had miraculously survived, the police created a composite sketch of the attacker. When the case's investigator, Gil Carrillo, showed it to a friend, a detective from the East Los Angeles Police Department, his friend said that he also had something to show. He took a photo robot out of his car and showed it to Gil Carrillo. When they placed the two images side by side, they realized that both photo robots depicted the same person. The photo robot of Gil Carrillo's friend was created based on the description of a witness who had witnessed the kidnapping attempt in Pico Rivera. On March 27, 1985, in the Whittier area of Los Angeles, the police received a report of a double murder. When law enforcement arrived at the crime scene, they were met with a horrific sight. A man was lying on a couch with a gunshot wound to the temple. He appeared to have been asleep when he was shot. The deceased was identified as 64-year-old Vincent Zazara. Police found the body of 44-year-old Maxim Zazara on the bed in the bedroom. The woman had been raped, had multiple stab wounds above her genitals, and her eyes had been gouged out. The house was completely ransacked. Jewelry and various items had been stolen, with a total value of about $40,000. Law enforcement believed the attacker had entered the home through an open bathroom window. According to the forensic report, a .22 caliber pistol had been used in the murder of Vincent Zazura. The key piece of evidence was a shoe print found near the window, which corresponded to a shoe size of approximately 45 to 46. In parallel with the murders, there were numerous cases of child abductions and attempted abductions in Los Angeles and its surrounding areas. They abducted the children, committed sexual assault, and then abandoned them on the streets. The abducted children described the same person as a tall, thin Latino man with long hair. He wore black clothes and a black members-only jacket. He had yellow, chipped teeth and a foul odor. Gil Carrillo, the investigator of the Dale Yoshi Okazaki murder case, believed that the child abductions and the gruesome murders that were occurring at the time were committed by the same person, a sexual sadist and a serial killer. But no one shared his opinion. According to Gil Carrillo, the serial killer, in addition to the horrors he committed, enjoyed seeing fear in the eyes of his victims, because the killer could have killed Maria Hernandez by shooting her in the back as soon as he approached, but he did not. He specifically made sure that Maria Hernandez turned around and saw fear in her eyes. In the case of Dale Yoshi Okazaki, he also waited until the hidden woman poked her head out from under the kitchen counter to check if the attacker had left. He shot her when he saw her frightened eyes. The murder of Tsai Lian Yu was no exception. The attacker could have killed her in the car, but he didn't. He needed the confrontation. He wanted to see the fear in his victim's eyes. That's why Gil Carrillo believed that the same person was responsible for all these horrors. At a meeting of local law enforcement agencies in Los Angeles, where different departments were sharing information about missing and abduction cases, Detective Gil Carrillo argued that some of those incidents might be connected to the murders. Most people dismissed the idea. It seemed hard to believe that the same person could be responsible for such a range of crimes. But Carrillo refused to drop the theory and continued digging. One day, a police officer friend from the East Los Angeles Patrol Division contacted him with new information. Several callers had reported that an unknown man in a car was following them, watching them, and trying to approach them. The officer also provided the vehicle's license plate number. Carrillo quickly arranged a surveillance team to track the car. During the operation, officers observed the man repeatedly tailing women and attempting to make contact. He was tall, had long hair, appeared to be Latino, and closely resembled the suspect investigators were trying to identify. When the man realized police were watching him, he tried to flee, but officers arrested him and brought him to the station. The suspect was identified as Arturo Robles. During questioning, Robles claimed he simply liked women and was trying to meet them. Carrillo later showed Maria Hernandez a photo lineup of 6 individuals, including Robles. Hernandez said Robles might be the person who shot her and killed Dale Yoshi Okazaki, but she emphasized that she was not certain. Even with that uncertainty, investigators obtained a search warrant for Robles' apartment. During the search, they found various items that appeared suspicious to detectives, including magazine cutouts of women, a black members-only jacket, and women's underwear. However, when Robles was questioned further, none of the surviving victims could positively identify him, including Maria Hernandez. Without direct evidence linking him to the crimes, authorities had no legal grounds to hold him, and Robles was ultimately released. On May 14, 1985, a 66-year-old man, William Doi, called the Monterey Park Police to report that an intruder had broken into his home and attacked him and his disabled wife. When the police arrived at the scene, they were met with a horrific sight. William Doi had been brutally beaten and had a gunshot wound to the face from a .22 caliber firearm. He was still alive, but he died after being taken to the hospital. Law enforcement officers found William Doe's wife, 56-year-old Lillian, unconscious in her bedroom. She had been raped and severely beaten. A finger cuff was attached to her left thumb, and blood was flowing from her right thumb, suggesting that the woman's fingers had been crushed by the device as she tried to free herself. The house was a complete mess. The couple's money and valuables had been stolen. In parallel with the murders, child abductions continued. A friend of investigator Gil Carrillo called and told him that the Montebello police were investigating a child abduction case and that they had evidence that might help him connect the murders and the kidnappings. He showed Gil Carrillo a photo of a shoe print found at the scene of the child's abduction. The kidnapper had kidnapped an 8-year-old child from his home, taken her to a construction site, sexually assaulted her, and then released her. That day, concrete was being poured at the construction site, and Montebello police found his shoe print in the concrete. The shoe print found at the construction site was identical to the one discovered at the murder scenes. For Gil Carrillo, it was now clear that the same person was committing all these horrific crimes, and there was finally indirect evidence to support it. June 27, 1985, another murder occurred in Arcadia. Law enforcement found 32-year-old Patty Elaine Higgins murdered in her own home. Her throat had been slashed, and the knife was still lodged in the wound. 4 days after this gruesome murder, on July 2nd, another murder occurred. The murder took place a few kilometers from the scene of the murder of Patty Elaine Higgins. Law enforcement officers found the body of 75-year-old Mary Louise Cannon in her home. She was also killed in exactly the same way as Patty Elaine Higgins 4 days earlier. July 5th, 1985. In Sierra Madre, a teenage girl named Whitney Bennett was attacked in her home while she slept. She was violently assaulted and left unconscious, and the intruder believed she would not survive. Afterward, he stole valuables from the house and fled. Despite serious injuries, doctors were able to save her. At the scene, investigators found shoe impressions on a blanket. Those prints matched impressions linked to Maxime Zazara's residence and to another open case involving a missing child. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. There was no longer any doubt. The same person was connected to these brutal incidents, and Detective Gil Carrillo had been right. Authorities were dealing with a dangerous repeat offender. On July 6, 1985, a serving police officer, John Rodriguez, called the police and reported that someone was trying to break into his home. However, when the intruder realized he had been noticed, he fled. When the police arrived, John showed them the shoe prints he had found near the house, which he had covered with a box to prevent the wind from erasing them. The prints matched shoe prints found at previous crime scenes. The shoe print was quite clear, allowing law enforcement to fully reconstruct its tread pattern. It was identified as a size 43.5 Avia brand athletic shoe. Production of this brand had only recently begun. Law enforcement officials discovered that 1,356 pairs of Avia 440 model shoes were imported into the United States from Taiwan on January 9, 1985. Based on the testimonies of the surviving victims, police assumed that the shoes were black. A total of 6 pairs of the Avia size 43.5 black shoes were produced. 5 pairs were sold in Arizona, and 1 pair was sold in Los Angeles. However, law enforcement officers were unable to determine which store sold this particular pair. Nevertheless, this was already a very significant piece of evidence, as the shoe prints linked many of the crimes together, including the child abductions. The police reviewed all unsolved murders in the region. They identified a total of 30 cases, and as they examined them, the connection to a serial killer became increasingly clear. Soon after, the police learned of another attack. In Monrovia, two sisters in their 80s, Mabel and Florence, were brutally tortured in their own home. They were found 2 days later by a gardener who notified the police. Mabel was lying on the bed in a star pose and was tied to it with electrical tape. The attacker raped her, then inflicted multiple injuries on her head with a hammer. Mabel's sister Florence had also been injured with a hammer. Both were still alive, although in a comatose state. After being taken to the hospital, Mabel soon died from the injuries she had sustained, while Florence passed away a month later. While inspecting the crime scene, law enforcement officers saw pentagrams drawn with lipstick on the bedroom wall. A pentagram was also drawn on one of the victim's legs. Law enforcement officers suspected that the attacker had left them a message in this way, or that he was a Satanist performing a ritual. It was also possible that he was imitating Manson. The police found an alarm clock on the bedroom floor, which had a partial shoe print on it. Forensic experts compared this partial print to those found at other crime scenes from Avia shoes, and it turned out to be an exact match. While reviewing cold cases, Detective Gil Carrillo and his team were drawn to a particular incident, an attempted abduction of a young girl from the street, which took place within the jurisdiction of the Northeast Police Division. The girl fought back, causing the attacker to panic and flee. He was driving a Toyota. He violated traffic rules while driving away from the crime scene and was stopped by the patrol police. When the police officer asked him for his driver's license, it turned out that he did not have any documents. The police officer ordered him to get out of the car, put his hands on the hood, and not move. At that moment, the police officer approached his motorcycle to issue him a ticket. While the officer was issuing the fine, a message came through his radio about an attempted kidnapping of a girl. The description that was broadcast matched the suspect's vehicle. As soon as the criminal heard this, he drew a pentagram on the car's windshield with lipstick and ran away. Later, it was discovered that the vehicle had been stolen. Gil Carrillo's investigative team contacted the Northeast Police Department and requested permission to take fingerprints from the car. However, the local police informed them that they would handle everything themselves. A complex system of law enforcement agencies operated in Los Angeles County. The county had the sheriff's department, city police, and dozens of independent law enforcement agencies. Because of the vast territory, a criminal could move into 3 different jurisdictions within minutes. Each jurisdiction had its own detectives, who in most cases did not cooperate with each other. Due to competition among detectives, when multiple jurisdictions were involved in an investigation, conflicts arose between them. They did not share information about the investigation with each other, which created significant problems for the progress of the case. On the night of July 7, 1985, a double attack occurred in Monterey Park. The attacker broke into the home of 60-year-old Joyce Nelson and tried to rape her. The woman resisted, and as a result, the attacker beat her brutally, so severely that the imprint of the attacker's sneaker was left on her face. Joyce Nelson died from the injuries she sustained. Since the attacker could not satisfy his sexual needs with Nelson, he found a new victim in the same neighborhood. He broke into the home of 63-year-old Sophie Diekman, handcuffed her, raped her, and robbed her. Law enforcement officers found a shoe print at the scene of both crimes. It was the imprint of an Avia sneaker, the same print that had been discovered at other crime scenes as well. The public was in complete panic. The main topic of all television channels was these terrible crimes. The media called the serial killer the Night Stalker. Investigative agencies worked at full capacity so that no detail would be missed in the search for the serial killer. A hotline was created where the sheriff's department detectives checked the information received. The headquarters received thousands of calls every day, although most of them were insignificant for the investigation. On July 9, 1985, when the suspect was arrested with the stolen car, the same car on which he had drawn a pentagram and fled, Gil Carrillo was told that the police of that jurisdiction would examine the vehicle, take fingerprints, and share the information. However, this did not happen. After negotiations, when Gil Carrillo's investigative team was finally granted permission to examine the car, it was already too late because the vehicle had been sitting in the impound lot under the sun, and all the organic evidence had already been destroyed. However, law enforcement officers discovered a plastic box inside the car, which contained a dentist's business card. The clinic was located in Chinatown. After questioning the dentist, it was revealed that the suspect had visited the doctor on July 3rd and had met him as Richard Mina. The x-rays showed that he had a very poor dental condition and would definitely need to return in the near future. Law enforcement imposed 24-hour surveillance on the dental clinic, but the head of the police department believed that the likelihood of the suspect returning was very low. He considered it a waste of time and money, and therefore the surveillance was removed. However, an alarm was installed in the clinic, and the dentist was instructed to call the police if the suspect appeared. On July 15th, the very first day after the police ended the surveillance and installed the alarm, the dentist called the police and asked why they had not responded to his alert. It turned out that the suspect had been at the clinic that day. The dentist had pressed the alarm, but the alarm did not work. On July 20th, 1985, another horrific crime occurred. An assailant broke into the home of 66-year-old Layla Niding and her husband, 68-year-old Maxon Niding, while they were sleeping. He slashed them with a machete, then shot them both in the head, .2-caliber handgun. He took valuables from the home and fled. That same morning, another killing was reported in Los Angeles. The perpetrator entered through the back door and attacked the family while they were asleep. Shinenarong Kawanant was killed in the bedroom with a small caliber firearm. The intruder then assaulted the surviving family members, took money and valuables, and fled the scene. At the crime scene, investigators recovered an Avia sneaker impression, .2 Kawanant's wife provided detectives with a detailed description of the attacker. Using her account, a composite sketch was created, and it closely resembled the sketches produced in the Okazaki and Hernandez cases. This was the image law enforcement later released to the public. On August 6, 1985, in Northridge, a gunman broke into the home of Christopher and Virginia Peterson. He entered the bedroom and shot Virginia with a shotgun. The bullet hit the woman on the left side of her nose and lodged near her skull, sparing no vital organs. Virginia's screams woke her husband, Christopher, and he tried to get up, after which the gunman shot him as well. The bullet hit her in the right temple, but missed the head, and the man miraculously survived. Despite being shot, Christopher still got out of bed and confronted the attacker, but the perpetrator managed to escape. Upon inspecting the scene of the attack, law enforcement officers determined that the killer had used a new caliber firearm during this attempted murder. Forensic experts established that the bullets found at the scene were of an old type that was no longer manufactured at that time. On August 8, 1985, another murder occurred in Diamond Bar. A serial killer broke into the home of 31-year-old Elias Abavati and shot the sleeping victim in the head. He then handcuffed and severely beat his 27-year-old wife, Sakinas, forced her to hand over her jewelry, and then raped her. Sakinas told law enforcement that when the killer was sexually assaulting her, he said not to look at him. When she replied that she would not look and swore to God, the killer responded, "Swear not to God, but to Satan." The murder of Elias Abawath was carried out with a caliber firearm using the same type of ammunition as in the attempted murder of the Petersons. The Sheriff's Homicide Division prepared 23 confidential video recordings describing the suspect and sent them to all law enforcement agencies so that everyone would have unified information. The serial killer was described as a Latino male, aged 20 to 35, standing 177 to 182 centimeters tall, with a slim build and wavy or curly hair. His distinguishing features included yellowed and blackened teeth. He wore athletic-style shoes in size 45 to 46. On August 18, 1985, a horrific crime occurred in San Francisco. An attacker broke into the home of 66-year-old Peter Penn and 62-year-old Barbara Penn. He shot Peter in the head while he was sleeping, killing him on the spot. He then sexually assaulted his wife and shot her in the head as well, but she miraculously survived and was taken to the hospital unconscious. Law enforcement officers found satanic symbols drawn by the killer at the crime scene, 5 caliber firearm cartridges, and a footprint. When law enforcement released a special report detailing the crime, it caught the attention of the Glendale police. The Glendale police requested a ballistic examination to determine whether the murder in San Francisco was connected to crimes committed in Los Angeles. The ballistic analysis and the evidence found at the scene confirmed that the same serial killer was active in both areas. The Los Angeles Police Department shared detailed information about the killer with law enforcement in San Francisco. Although this information was supposed to remain confidential due to the interests of the investigation, San Francisco Mayor Dianne Feinstein made a public statement that a serial killer was active in the city and urged residents to exercise caution. In addition, she offered a $10,000 reward for information about the serial killer that would help the investigation in capturing him. The public disclosure of confidential information about the serial killer by the mayor posed a serious risk to the investigation, because the killer learned what information the police had about him. Law enforcement faced an even more difficult task, as the killer might become more cautious, change his tactics, or disappear entirely. On August 24, 1985, another attack occurred in Los Angeles. The attacker broke into the home of 30-year-old Bill Carnes and his fiancée, 29-year-old Inez Erickson, through the back door. He entered the couple's bedroom and shot Bill Carnes 3 times in the head, 5 caliber handgun. He then tied Inez Erickson up with a tie and raped her. The attacker told the woman that he was a night stalker and then forced Inez to swear by Satan and say that she loved Satan. After that, he took cash and jewelry. Before leaving the house, he ordered Erickson to tell the police that the night stalker was there. After the attack, Bill Carnes, who was wounded, miraculously survived, and Inez Erickson gave a detailed description of the attacker's appearance. This case also revealed the killer's confidence. He no longer hesitated to reveal his identity, which reinforced the investigation's conclusion that he was a serial killer and took pleasure in these horrific crimes. On the day Bill Carnes and his fiancée were attacked, James Romero, a newspaper delivery man in the same neighborhood, noticed a suspicious car. The boy memorized the car and some characters from its license plate and then provided the information to the police. This information was quickly spread in the media. A short time later, the man contacted the police and said that his friend's car had recently been stolen in Chinatown. The stolen car's license plate matched the data that James Romero provided to the police. Soon the police found the car abandoned in the city. It was an orange 1976 Toyota. Forensics found a fingerprint on the rearview mirror, but at that time the fingerprint database was not automated, so searching for it manually took a long time. On August 27, 1985, a woman called the police and said that her father, who lived in Skid Row near the Greyhound bus station, had told her that he knew someone named Rick and suspected that he was the serial killer, the Night Stalker. The police quickly located the man, and he told them that he knew Rick, who was from El Paso. The key information he provided was that Rick had confessed to him about a couple's murder in Monterey Park, which he had committed caliber revolver. This information was confidential and known only to the police. The man also told authorities that Rick had given him the revolver, which he later gave to an acquaintance while he was in Tijuana. 2 detectives traveled with him to Tijuana to recover the revolver. They soon found both the gun and a tape recorder. It turned out that the tape recorder had been stolen from the home of the murdered sisters, Mabel and Florence. Their grandson had purchased it and still had the receipt, which matched the serial number of the recorder. Based on this new information, the police no longer had any doubt that the serial killer they were searching for was indeed Rick. While the investigation was ongoing in Los Angeles, an informant in San Francisco gave the police a bracelet and said that it belonged to his mother-in-law, who lived in San Pablo, and that he believed the item might be connected to the wanted serial killer, the Night Stalker. The woman told law enforcement that the bracelet had been given to her by her boyfriend, Armando Rodriguez. Armando had received the bracelet from his friend Rick, who was from El Paso. She also described Rick's appearance to the authorities, and her description matched that of the suspect being sought by the police. After interviewing the woman, law enforcement officers went to the address she had provided, where her boyfriend, Armando Rodriguez, lived. Following their conversation with Armando, the officers obtained very important information. It turned out that the suspect they were looking for, Rick, actually had a completely different name, and his real name was Richard Ramirez. The San Francisco police immediately notified the Los Angeles police that the real name of the serial killer they were looking for, known as Ricky, was Richard Ramirez. The Los Angeles police found 8 Richard Ramirez's dead in their database. They compared his fingerprints with those found on the windshield of the stolen car and found one match. A background check revealed that he had a criminal history, theft, drug use, and carjacking, but no violent crimes. The police also saw a photo of him taken during his last arrest, which was shown to the informant. The informant confirmed that the photo was indeed of the serial killer wanted by the police, Richard Ramirez. By agreement of the law enforcement agencies of Los Angeles and San Francisco, a press conference was held that same day where the name, surname, and photo of the serial killer were made public, and the public was urged to immediately notify the police if anyone had or learns of the whereabouts of the said person. Ricardo Leyva Munoz Ramirez, known as Richard Ramirez, was born on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas. Ramirez had a difficult childhood. He was often abused in his family, both physically and psychologically. His father was particularly cruel, and according to reports, he would tie Richard to a cemetery and leave him there all night. One of the decisive roles in Ramirez's psychological development was played by his cousin Michael, a Vietnam War veteran who developed severe mental illness after the war. Michael often told Richard shocking stories about his experiences in the war, including details of torture, murder, and violence. A particularly horrific incident left a deep mark on Ramirez's psyche. His cousin shot and killed his own wife with a firearm right in front of young Richard. During adolescence, Ramirez became interested in Satanism and began using hard drugs. According to psychologists, his personality was profoundly shaped by his harsh and violent family environment, the destructive influence of his traumatized cousin, and his growing alienation from his own inner world. All of this became the starting point of the dark path that would ultimately evolve into one of the most terrifying crime sprees in American history. On August 30th, 1985, the police set up surveillance at the Greyhound bus station because they had information that Richard Ramirez would appear there that day. However, Ramirez did not arrive at the station. It was later discovered that at that time he was in Arizona visiting his brother. By then, photographs of Richard Ramirez had already been published in newspapers and shown on television, making him the most widely recognized criminal in the country. However, he was unaware of this since he was in Arizona. On August 31st, Richard Ramirez returned to Los Angeles by bus. Law enforcement officers, dressed in plain clothes, were waiting for him at the bus station. As soon as he got off the bus, Ramirez recognized the police. At that moment, he did not know that he had already been identified, but he still tried to avoid the police and quickly entered a nearby store on the street. In the newspaper section, he saw that his photo was on the front page of every paper. He realized that he had been identified and panicked. The people around him were pointing at him and shouting, "That's him, the Night Stalker!" Some even called the police. Frightened, Ramirez ran out of the store. At first, he tried to get on a bus, but when he realized that people recognized him there as well, he tried to hail a taxi on the street. However, everyone already knew who he was, and no taxis would stop. Panicked, he ran across the highway and fled in a northeasterly direction. Then he tried to steal a car on the street, but the owner resisted, and he was unable to steal the car. Panicked, he attempted to steal another car. He threatened the owner of the car, threatened to kill her if she didn't give him the keys. Manuel de la Torre, who was on the street, saw all this. He ran to help the frightened woman, picked up an iron rod that had fallen on the ground, and hit Richard Ramirez in the head. As a result of the blow, Ramirez fell to the ground and broke his head. After falling, he managed to get up soon after and tried to escape again, but Manuel chased him and hit him with the iron rod again. A large crowd gathered on the street because of the noise, and when they recognized Ramirez, they all started beating him. At the same time, the people living on that street called the police. When police officer Andy Ramirez arrived at the scene, he found Richard Ramirez sitting on the sidewalk, severely beaten and surrounded by people who were not allowing him to escape. The police handcuffed Ramirez and placed him in the back seat of a police car. The crowd at the scene continued to grow, showing each other newspapers and shouting that the serial killer had been caught. Law enforcement quickly transported Ramirez to the police station. Soon, a large group of angry people gathered outside the station, demanding that Ramirez be punished with their own hands. The officers realized that the situation could escalate to the point where they might lose control, and the crowd could lynch him. For this reason, they decided to transfer him to the central jail. During the transfer, the car carrying Ramirez, police cars, and motorcycles protected the front and rear, while helicopters patrolled from above. After Richard Ramirez was arrested, law enforcement called in the surviving victims and kidnapped children to help identify the serial killer. Ramirez was lined up with other suspects, and the survivors were asked to point out their attacker. The witnesses immediately and easily identified Richard Ramirez. On October 24, 1985, the trial of Richard Ramirez began. He was charged with 14 counts of first-degree murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 11 counts of rape, and 14 counts of burglary. He pleaded not guilty to all the charges. During the trial, Ramirez raised his hand on which a pentagram was drawn and shouted to those present, "Hail Satan!" Ramirez had a strange charisma that attracted women. He had numerous female admirers who sent him photos and letters in prison and even attended his trial. Even though most people in the courtroom considered him a brutal criminal, they still idolized him. Among Ramirez's admirers was a woman named Doreen Leoy, who sent him numerous love letters while he was in prison. Ramirez proposed to Leoy, and they were married at San Quentin State Prison in California. Doreen Leoy even stated that if Richard Ramirez were sentenced to death, she would take her own life. On September 20th, 1989, Judge Michael Atenon found Richard Ramirez guilty of 14 counts of first-degree murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 11 counts of rape, and 14 counts of robbery. On November 7th of the same year, he was sentenced to the maximum penalty of death by gas chamber. On June 7, 2013, After spending more than 20 years on death row, Richard Ramirez died of lymphoma. His relatives did not claim his body, so his body was cremated. On December 21, 2010, Diana Thompson, known online under the pseudonym Bowdy Movin for anonymity, saw a post on Facebook about a horrifying video. The video was titled "One Boy and Two Kittens," and the entire Facebook community was talking about it. She became curious about the video's content and clicked the provided link. The video showed a boy wearing a dark green hooded sweatshirt that covered most of his face. He first pets two kittens, then puts them in a plastic bag, connects the valve attached to the bag to a vacuum cleaner hose, pumps the air out, and kills the animals in this gruesome manner. Outraged by the sadistic behavior of the unknown boy, Diana Thompson joined a Facebook group through a link provided in the comments of the video, whose members were trying to find the unknown person shown in the video. The video was uploaded by a user named WannaLive500. While checking his profile, the group members noticed he liked the movie Catch Me If You Can. In the film, Leonardo DiCaprio plays a con man who skillfully forges documents while being hunted by an FBI agent across the country. By liking the movie, he seemed to be giving the group members a hint and trying to challenge them. The group members seriously decided to find him. They thought that with the items in the room, they could figure out where the video was taken and then track down the unknown boy. They started a detailed examination of the room through the video. The room was very small and narrow. In the video, there was a door, a bed, a table, a door handle, and a socket. Such details might have helped them figure out in which country the video was filmed. For example, the sockets in England are different from the ones used in America. The blanket covering the bed had a picture of a wolf on it. They found out that the blanket had been purchased on eBay and was manufactured in North America. The blanket had only one buyer, although the group members were unable to determine who it was. The product was shipped to any corner of the world, so it could be anywhere on Earth. The video also had the sounds of laughter and conversation in the background. The group members thought other people in the room were not visible in the frame. One of the Ukrainian members of the group noted that it was in Russian and that the author of the video might have been in Russia. The group members started listening to the voices in the video from the beginning again in order to figure out what was being said. In the video, people were talking and laughing loudly, but at a certain point, the laughter and talking suddenly stopped, as if everyone was leaving the room together. However, after listening carefully, they realized that these voices were not real and were just recording. The group members realized that the stranger was trying to confuse them and lead them to a dead end using the recording. A short time later, another video appeared online showing the same room where the stranger was playing with dead kittens. Along with the video, he uploaded several photos and shared their link through a fake profile in the group where his identity was being sought. When the group members clicked the link, they came across a photo showing a boy with the kittens, but his face was digitally obscured. It seemed like he enjoyed being the center of attention, giving the group another clue about him. In addition, it became clear that he was monitoring the group's investigation. He had joined the group using a fake profile, which everyone eventually found out about, but he might have had other fake profiles in the group as well to keep observing the ongoing events. The group members who used nicknames and didn't reveal their personal information were safe. However, for those group members whose real personal information was publicly available, it posed a serious threat. One of the group members, who was a psychologist, noted that this person liked to shock and constantly be the center of attention. He said this horrific behavior was likely neither the first nor the last for him. His subsequent actions would be given even more severe forms. Such people start with animals, and when that is no longer enough, they move on to more vulnerable people, women, children, or the elderly. According to him, this was a signal and a major sign that a future serial killer was taking shape before their eyes. When the group members watched the second video, they noticed new items in the room which could help narrow down the search area to a specific country. The video showed a cigarette box of which size and shape vary across different countries. The text is also different from what is written on the box according to the law. The warning text from the Ministry of Health on this particular box was printed on cigarette boxes in North America. A yellow vacuum cleaner was also seen in the video. When the group members searched for information about it, they discovered that this particular model of vacuum cleaner was only sold in North America. Therefore, the group members needed to search for the video's author in Mexico, the United States, or Canada. One day, unexpectedly, one of the group members received a message from a fake Facebook profile. The message read, "The person you are looking for is named Luka Magnotta." There was a lot of information about Luka Magnotta on the internet. One of the links led to a YouTube video. It was a slideshow with the New Order song True Faith playing in the background. When the group members searched for more information about Luka Magnotta, they discovered that he lived quite luxuriously. He had photos taken in the Bermuda Islands by the Eiffel Tower, at the Trevi Fountain in Rome, in Miami, and in Russia, at Red Square. They also discovered hundreds of his fan pages and numerous comments praising and admiring him. New rumors about Luka appeared on the internet every day. It was said that he was the long-lost cousin of River Phoenix. It was claimed that he was a model and was dating the singer Madonna. Against this backdrop, the group members created a private group on Facebook to search for Luka Magnotta, inviting only trusted people to join. Even though the new group members found a lot of information and photos of Luka Magnotta from various places around the world, his current whereabouts remained unclear. It remained unclear. One of the group members accidentally discovered a video from 3 years ago where Luka Magnotta was participating in a modeling reality show casting. From his manner of speaking, it was evident that he was an arrogant and self-satisfied person. In the article about the casting, they discovered that Luka Magnotta was from Canada. While examining his photos in detail, the group members noticed one oddity. In one of the photos, which seemed to depict a wedding and where he wrote that he married a Russian girl, the color of his face was markedly different from the color of his body. One of the group members quickly found the original of this photo. It turned out that he was simply adding his face to someone else's real photos. It all seemed as though Luka Magnotta was creating a fake identity with his own hands. However, when they rechecked his fan pages and comments, they noticed that despite appearing to be written by different people, the style, phrases, and words in the posts were all the same. As a result, the group members thought that Luka Magnotta might have been creating the fan pages and groups himself, where he tried to promote himself using false information and photos. Later, the group members found another article about Luka Magnotta in the Toronto Sun magazine, written by the local tabloid journalist Joe Warmington. Because of this, directors and agents no longer wanted to work with him, as everyone knew about these fabricated rumors. This is why he tried to use every public platform to prove that there was no connection between him and Karla Homolka. According to Joe Warmington, in 2007, 3 years before these events, he heard a phone call from an excited boy named Luka Magnotta on a popular radio show. According to him, he was very nervous because his name was associated with an affair with Karla Homolka. Karla Homolka was the wife of Canadian serial killer Paul Bernardo. Homolka was involved in the murder of 3 14-year-old girls, including the murder of her sister. The investigation made a deal with her. In exchange for immunity, Homolka testified against her husband. However, it was later revealed that Homolka was not only an active participant, but in some cases she was the one who initiated the murders. Joe Warmington became interested in the case and later wrote to Luka Magnotta's email. Shortly after writing, Magnotta called. Joe Warmington told him it would be interesting to meet in person. According to Warmington, when he saw Luka Magnotta at the meeting, he was shocked, as he looked remarkably similar to the serial killer Paul Bernardo. Magnotta told him that his modeling career had been completely ruined because some people on the internet were associating his name with Karla Homolka. Magnotta said that these rumors destroyed his life, he lost his job, and most importantly, it posed a serious threat to his health. Magnotta said that people found out where he lived and threatened to kill him, which is why he had to change his residence. He said that he was on the verge of a nervous breakdown because all of this had caused irreparable damage to his reputation. Because of this, directors and agents no longer intended to work with him, as everyone knew about these fabricated rumors. That's why he tried to use every public platform to prove that there was no connection between him and Karla Homolka. When the group members watched the video that accompanied the article, they concluded that Luka Magnotta was using fake accounts he had created himself to spread the rumors, gain public attention, and increase his popularity. The group members tried to determine Luka Magnotta's location by checking all of his photos, believing that they would find a digital trace in one of them, because sometimes when a photo is taken, additional information is stored in it. Such data includes details about the camera model, the date it was taken, and the geographical coordinates. There is a website where it is possible to upload a photo and view its data. In one of the photos, Luka was sitting on a couch. Based on the surroundings, it looked like a store inside a shopping mall. The website automatically identified the photo's geotag, which showed that the location was in a shopping mall in Toronto, Canada. The main detail that was determined from the photos was the date they were taken, October 30th, 2010. This meant that Luka Magnotta was in Toronto at the time when the kitten-killing video was published. The group members concluded that he was in Canada and decided to find his address. In one of the photos, Luka was standing on a balcony, which was likely on the 3rd or 4th floor of a multi-story building. Particularly drawing their attention was the Petro-Canada gas station near an intersection. When checking on Google Maps, the map showed hundreds of similar stations. In one of Luka Magnotta's posts, he wrote that photographers frequently went to his house in the suburb of Etobicoke, Toronto, and bothered him. The group members quickly found the gas station that appeared in Luka Magnotta's photo with the help of Google Street View. Behind it was a gray residential house where the photo was taken. The group members concluded that it was time to contact the police. They called the Toronto Police Department and provided all the information they had. It took a lot of effort to convince the police that all of this was true and that action was needed. When the police arrived at Luka Magnotta's apartment and knocked on the door, it was opened by another person. He confirmed that Luka Magnotta had lived in the apartment before, but he then moved to Russia. Soon, a new video appeared on the internet showing a boy drowning a kitten in water. Later the same day, another shocking video was published. The screen showed a room with the Christmas carol Little Drummer Boy playing. The boy gently pets the kitten on the bed and then leaves it. At that moment, a python appears from under the pillows, attacking the defenseless kitten and swallowing it. When the group members saw the name of the video's creator, they immediately recognized who it was. The video was uploaded under the name Leslie Ann Downey. This confirmed that Luka Magnotta was seriously obsessed with serial killers. This was a very worrying sign. The emergence of new videos attracted the attention of the press. The London-based newspaper, The Sun, published an article with the headline, "Find the Lunatic Who Fed a Kitten to a Python." Shortly after the article was published, The Sun journalist Alex West received a message from another fake profile. The message said, "The person you're looking for is currently in London. His name is Luka Magnotta, and he is at the Fusilier Hotel." Alex West decided to meet him and took a voice recorder along in order to secretly record Magnotta. He told Luka Magnotta that he was a journalist from The Sun and had some questions. Magnotta asked if he was being recorded, and when he was told he wasn't, he agreed to talk. Alex West asked why he was in London. Luka Magnotta replied that he had been receiving death threats, which is why he was there. As for who was threatening him and why, he didn't know. He assumed it was because of the rumors about him circulating on the internet. Alex asked if he was the one in the kitten murder videos, which he categorically denied. He added that anything can be done on a computer, and someone acted deliberately to accuse him. After the conversation with Luka Magnotta, Alex West received another letter, this time under the name John Kilbride. John Kilbride was the name of one of the victims of Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. The letter said, "I enjoy watching people try to find evidence against me, but in the end, they won't find anything, and they won't even learn my name. Victory is always mine because I always have a joker hidden in my pocket. Get ready for my new videos. For my next videos, participants will be people, not kittens." When the police were informed about the letter, they simply stated that they did not have enough grounds to pursue the case. The members of the group were outraged by the police's inaction. In their opinion, the mention in the letter of transitioning from kittens to people was yet another dangerous signal. This was also seen as another step for Luka Magnotta towards his coveted fame. On May 26, 2012, at 5 a.m., one of the group members, John Green, received a message on Facebook from a fake profile. The message read, "Hello, I came across a video on the internet. I think it might interest you. I believe this is the guy you're looking for." John Green opened the video, which was titled "Moonlit Ice Cutter." The video showed a naked man tied to a bed, his eyes blindfolded, and a chain placed over his mouth. He could barely move his arms and legs. He was alive, but it appeared that he was dazed by intoxicating substances. Next to the bed was standing a person dressed in black, with a face covered by a hood. In the room, the song "True Faith" by New Order was playing. John Green immediately realized that this was a reference to the movie American Psycho, where the song plays during the club scene. A hooded person climbs on top of a man tied to a bed and imitates sexual intercourse. He then stabs him in the stomach several times with a screwdriver, and he shows the wounds on camera. He then shoves a knife down her throat, then cuts off her limbs and head. He then uses the knife to cut off a piece of flesh from her buttocks and throws it to the dog in the room to eat. When other members of the group saw the video, everyone was convinced it was Luka Magnotta, as the suspect was petting the victim as he behaved like a kitten. The song playing in the video had often been used by Magnotta in the slideshows he posted on YouTube. In early 2011, online investigators handed over the information they had gathered about Luka Magnotta to the Toronto police, which led to an investigation being launched in February of the same year. However, the investigation ended without results, as the case involved only animals. Unfortunately, this kind of attitude is common in many countries. The group members wrote a letter to a detective at the Toronto police, informing them that they had seen a new video online depicting the brutal murder of a human. They were sure Luke had committed the murder, although they didn't get any answer from the police. The news wasn't reporting on the murder either. There was complete silence everywhere. As a result, the group members began to think that the murder might not have been committed in Toronto. Luka Magnotta could have filmed that video anywhere. One of the group members recalled a video Magnotta had posted 3 months before the murder. When watching the video from the beginning again, they noticed a new detail in one of the photos. It was traffic lights. The traffic lights were of an unusual shape. Such traffic lights are not found in Toronto. In Toronto, the traffic lights are yellow and square-shaped. The group members had seen similar traffic lights in Montreal. They began a virtual tour of the streets using Google Maps. They examined many streets in detail and unexpectedly found the stairs and traffic light where Luka Magnotta had taken the photo. It was McGill University, located in the center of Montreal. They realized that the murder had most likely been committed in Montreal, and Luka Magnotta was there. On May 29, 2012, at 10 a.m., a call was made to 911 in Montreal, reporting that a suspicious gray suitcase had been found at 57-20 d'Iberville Boulevard. When the police arrived at the scene, they found a suspicious suitcase in the backyard of the building from which a terrible smell was coming. When the forensic experts opened the suitcase, they found the body of a Caucasian man inside. The man's hands, feet, and head had been severed. There were multiple stab wounds to his abdomen. Behind the suitcase were several garbage bags, some of which were leaking a reddish liquid, which turned out to be blood. The authorities carefully examined each bag. Among the trash, they found a wine bottle, a crumpled Casablanca movie poster, and a yellow t-shirt. In one of the bags, they found a dead black and white puppy, and when they searched the next set of garbage bags, they found a gray painted screwdriver that looked like an ice pick, an electric saw, and a knife with traces of skin and blood on it, and the rest of the body parts, legs and arms. However, one thing was unclear. The limbs had their feet and hands amputated, but the head was nowhere to be found. The police discovered an important piece of evidence in one of the garbage bags, a blood-stained blanket. Wrapped inside the blanket was a driver's license issued in Ontario and a pharmacy receipt. Both documents had the name Luka Magnotta. The receipt listed an address, 57-20 d'Iberville Boulevard, apartment 208. The police believed that the evidence found in the garbage bags and the suitcase was directly connected to apartment 208, and it was possible that the murder had taken place there. Law enforcement went to inspect apartment 208, but they didn't find anything suspicious at first glance. The apartment looked normal. There was a bottle of lemon juice on the table, and a pomegranate-colored sheet was spread over the bed. The only unusual thing was the strong smell of cleaning products that could be sensed in the apartment. No one was in the apartment, and since the police did not have a search warrant, they soon left. Law enforcement asked the building owner whether there were any cameras in the building. It turned out there were two, one in the vestibule monitoring the entrance and another in the basement, where residents took out their trash. While reviewing the footage from the basement camera, the police noticed that on May 25th at 2:47 a.m., a young man wearing a yellow t-shirt entered the basement. The man threw away some trash and left. However, he soon returned with another bag in hand. The police found it odd that he didn't dispose of all the garbage at once, as it usually happens. Instead, the man threw out the trash around 20 times, a process that continued until 4 in the morning. On May 29th, just a few hours after the discovery of the body, postal workers delivered packages with horrifying contents to 4 different locations. One of the packages was delivered to the Conservative Party headquarters in Ottawa and contained a severed right hand. The package also included a letter that mentioned Canada's then Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, and his wife. The letter read, "Stephen Harper and Lorraine Teskey will find out who this is." The second package was also delivered in Ottawa to the Liberal Party headquarters. It contained a severed left hand and a letter, which again mentioned the Prime Minister's wife. The letter read, "You should talk to Lorraine Teskey and her family. Do you have something to hide?" The third package was delivered to St. George's Private School in Vancouver. It contained a right ankle and a letter. The letter read, "Roses are red, violets are blue. The police will need your dental records to identify you." Beach's fourth package was also delivered to Fear Creek School in Vancouver. It contained only the ankle of a left foot. The packages had a barcode which helped police determine their destination. They had been sent from a postal office in Montreal, located about 10 minutes away from the building on Décarie Boulevard. While checking post office camera footage, police saw a man standing in line holding packages. They recognized him as the same person who appeared in the footage from the basement camera on Décarie Boulevard. The police retrieved the documents used to send the packages and discovered that all of them were signed by Luka Magnotta. Law enforcement realized that Luka Magnotta was not the victim, as initially suspected, but rather the suspect. The police quickly received a video that was going viral on the internet. Shocked law enforcement officers watched the murder footage as if they were witnesses themselves. In the murder room, they noticed a poster of the movie Casablanca, which had been found in the trash on Decarie Boulevard at the time of the body discovery. However, it had not been considered an important piece of evidence at that point. They also saw the victim, a young Asian man, estimated to be in his 30s. After viewing the video, law enforcement officials were convinced that the murder had occurred in apartment 208 on Decarie Boulevard. The police quickly obtained a search warrant and went to the apartment. Forensic experts darkened the room and sprayed a special substance, luminol, which reacts with blood and glows under ultraviolet light. There were traces of blood everywhere in the room. It was clear that the murder had taken place on the bed, and the body had then been dragged into the bathroom. At the entrance, next to a mirror, there was a note on the wall that read, "Don't like your reflection? Then don't look in the mirror. I don't care." The phrase, "I don't care," was particularly disturbing to the police. They believed that if he truly didn't care, he would commit another murder. In their view, they were dealing with a new serial killer who was ready to kill again. Law enforcement began analyzing the footage from the second set of cameras installed in the Decarie building. The video showed two young men entering the building. One of them was Luka Magnotta, who had also appeared in the Postal Department's video footage. The other was likely a young man of Asian descent. Later, only Luka Magnotta was seen exiting the building. He was wearing the same yellow shirt that the young Asian man had worn upon entering. The footage showed Luka Magnotta turning around, stopping by the mirror, and adjusting his hair as if he were completely unconcerned. He was holding a bag in his hand. The police believed that he had purchased gloves and chemical substances to clean the crime scene. They also began checking missing person reports and discovered that a 33-year-old Chinese man, Junlin, who was studying at Concordia University, had been reported missing. After verifying all the information they had, it became clear that this missing Chinese man was the one killed and mutilated by Luka Magnotta. The Montreal police contacted members of a Facebook group whose complaints had previously been overlooked and asked them to share any information and evidence they had gathered about Luka Magnotta. The group members knew that Luka Magnotta was a master of disguise. He had fled from Toronto to Montreal after a video of him torturing kittens went viral. Now that he had killed a person, it was clear that he would flee once again far away. But the question was, where to? That was yet to be determined. In the video that depicted the murder, a Casablanca poster was visible. One of the group members asked if anyone had seen the film. Then everyone realized it was yet another clue from Luka Magnotta. In the film's finale, the characters say that they only have one way to go, Paris. The group members then passed this information to the police. On May 31, 2012, Luka Magnotta was charged in absentia with first-degree murder, indignity to a human body, mailing prohibited packages, and sending threatening letters to Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Interpol announced an international warrant for Luka Magnotta on the same day. Law enforcement contacted Montreal Airport and requested a review of the security camera footage. During their surveillance search, they discovered that Luka Magnotta, walking through the airport, wearing a black short-sleeved t-shirt featuring Mickey Mouse and carrying a black plastic bag. He passed through security using a ticket for Air Transat Flight 610 bound for Paris, France. Montreal police immediately contacted the French authorities, explained the severity of the crime, and warned them that he might commit another murder on their territory. The Montreal police were outraged that proper attention had not been given to the online evidence, which might have made it possible to take action before the horrific murder took place. Following the notification from the Canadian police, the French police mobilized an operational group of 30-40 officers, and they launched an operation to arrest Luka Magnotta at Charles de Gaulle Airport. They already had information that the suspect might be wearing a wig and a t-shirt with a Mickey Mouse design. Upon arriving at the scene, the police began reviewing the airport's surveillance camera footage. Soon after, Luka Magnotta was captured in one of the videos heading toward the taxi stand. He wasn't contacting anyone and was behaving calmly and naturally. He arrived at the taxi, placed his luggage in the trunk, and got into the car. Law enforcement immediately contacted the taxi company and requested information about the route. They discovered that the taxi had taken Luka Magnotta to the Novotel Hotel. Upon arriving at the hotel, the police asked the administration if a room had been booked under the name Luka Magnotta. The hotel administration confirmed that there was a reservation under that name for one night. However, as it turned out, he did not stay at the hotel and did not spend the night there. The search operation hit a dead end. Luka Magnotta could have been anywhere, in Paris, its outskirts, or perhaps even outside the region. However, Canadian police provided them with important information. Luka Magnotta had withdrawn money with a bank card from an ATM located on Place de Clichy. The police reviewed the surveillance camera footage and confirmed that Luka Magnotta was still in Paris. According to the police, it was possible that Magnotta liked the area, which had many sex workers, and theoretically, someone could have become his next victim. The police checked all the hotels in the area, but they were unable to find any trace of Luka Magnotta. Shortly after the news broke in Paris, French journalists found and interviewed Luka Magnotta's mother, Anna Yorkin. As Magnotta's mother told reporters, Luka Magnotta was not her son's real name. She told the journalists that she and her future husband, Donald Newman, met each other in Canada, in the Scarborough area of Toronto, when they were around 14 to 15 years old. At the age of 16, Anna became pregnant, and on July 24, 1982, they had their first child, Eric Clinton Kirk Newman. As a result, she had to drop out of school. She and her husband, Donald Newman, also had alcohol and mental health issues, which she said had a major impact on the development of their family and the future of Eric Clinton Kirk Newman. According to her account, Eric was very shy as a child and was often the target of aggression from his peers. At the age of 16, Eric moved to Toronto, where he changed his name to Luka Magnotta. He wanted to pursue a career as an actor and model, and he starred in several erotic films, but his career did not develop as he wanted. After that, he switched to escort services. He told his mother that he was bisexual and that he was making a considerable amount of money from it. However, he also told his mother that he had a client named Manuel Manny Lopez, who wasn't just a client. According to Luka, Manny considered him his property. When rumors spread that a video of Luka Magnotta killing kittens appeared online, his mother asked if it was true, to which Luka replied, "Manny forced me to do this," through threats. There was also a lawyer, Romeo Salta, who said that in 2011, Luka Magnotta called him and urgently insisted on meeting with him as soon as possible. He invited Magnotta to his office. When Luka arrived, he told him that he was being accused of killing kittens. He claimed that it was someone named Manny Lopez who forced him to kill the kittens through threats. The lawyer told him that he should report this to the police. Magnotta refused, saying that Manny was always around him, and if he did report it, Manny would have killed him and his family. Magnotta also told his lawyer that Manny tortured him, strangling him with an electric cord, severely beating him, force-feeding him animal flesh and worms, and also forcing him to have sex with a dog and a cat. According to the lawyer, 2 weeks after speaking with Luka Magnotta, he received a call from the Miami police informing him that Luka Magnotta was in the hospital, intoxicated with drugs. Magnotta told police that he had been kidnapped from New York and taken to Miami, where Manny and his friends raped him and left him unconscious on a beach. The lawyer was shocked that Luka was considered a suspect in such a horrific, sadistic crime. He couldn't believe that the humble Luka he knew could be capable of such atrocities. He said that if this horrific murder had been committed by Luka Magnotta, then he definitely couldn't have done it alone. On June 4, 2012, the owner of an internet cafe in the Nikolai district of Berlin called the police and reported that Luka Magnotta, who was wanted worldwide by Interpol for a brutal murder, was at his cafe. He recognized him from a photo he had seen in the newspaper. When the police arrived at the scene, they found Luka Magnotta at the internet cafe reading information about his own search online. He was arrested and taken to the police station. On June 18, 2012, Luka Magnotta was handed over to Canadian authorities in Berlin and extradited by Royal Canadian Air Force aircraft to Mirabel International Airport, north of Montreal. The government stated that military transport was necessary to transfer Magnotta due to concerns over the safety of using a commercial flight and potential legal complications. Luka Magnotta's trial began on September 29, 2014 at the Quebec Superior Court. Magnotta admitted to killing and dismembering June Lin and sending her body parts across the country in packages, but he did not consider himself guilty because, according to him, he was sober at the time of the crime and claimed to have paranoid schizophrenia. Paranoid schizophrenia is a subtype of this disorder where a person experiences distrust and suspicions towards others. It often manifests with hallucinations and delusions, such as the belief that one is being persecuted or poisoned. This belief is often associated with family members, friends, or even government agencies. This was the argument used by Magnotta's defense team in court. They argued that Magnotta was in a psychotic state when he killed June Lee and dismembered his body. His actions, according to the defense, were influenced by his paranoid beliefs. Magnotta also claimed that he spent most of his time with Manny Lopez, who had been his client for several years before the murder. Magnotta claims that Manny was morbidly obsessed with her and abused her, both physically and sexually. Magnotta claimed that the video showing the killing of kittens actually depicted the actions of Manny Lopez, not his own, because Manny was controlling Magnotta's actions and threatening to kill him if he didn't kill the kittens himself. According to Magnotta, in May 2012, Manny contacted him, threatened him, and forced him to post an ad online in order to find a man. And when he met June Lin, Magnotta claimed he heard Manny's voice in his head, ordering him to tie June up and record everything on video, otherwise Manny would come and kill him. According to Magnotta, Manny's voice told him that he was outside in a van with tinted windows and claimed that June Lin was a government agent who was planning to kill him. The reports prepared by the psychiatrist presented by Luka Magnotta's defense all reached the same conclusion. Luka Magnotta had paranoid schizophrenia, and at the time of the crime, his condition was so severe that he could not perceive reality adequately. To support this conclusion, the defense presented extensive documentation of Magnotta's medical history. The records revealed that he frequently sought psychiatric help during adulthood. During this period, he often suffered from paranoid hallucinations related to persecution. It appeared that in the past, he had indeed been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. However, it was also noted that over the years, psychiatrists expressed doubts and did not rule out the possibility that Magnotta could have been fabricating his symptoms to obtain drugs or attract attention. Considering that Magnotta's father also had paranoid schizophrenia, Luka was well aware of the symptoms of the disease and was able to describe them to the doctors. One of his former partners stated that, despite Magnotta's denial, he was addicted to drugs, and it was possible that this was his method of obtaining a drug supply. As a result, if Magnotta was indeed using drugs, it's possible that he developed drug-induced psychosis. This is a condition where a person experiences hallucinations or delirium as a result of drug use, rather than due to a mental illness. The independent psychiatrist did not confirm that Magnotta had paranoid schizophrenia. He described him as an individual with a hysterical personality disorder. This is a condition characterized by a constant desire for attention and a strong sense of discomfort when not the center of attention. Additionally, it was believed that he might have had an emotionally unstable personality disorder. In this condition, a person often cannot control their emotions, especially in difficult situations, such as when their personality is rejected. He may also have had antisocial personality disorder, which is characterized by repeated law-breaking, persistent lying, disregard for the safety of others, and a complete lack of remorse or guilt for one's actions. After all of this, it remained unclear who Manny Lopez was, a real person or a figure invented by Magnotta. These pseudonyms included Beverly Kent, Vladimir Romanov, Artemis Yang, and Kirk Trammell. Typically, when Luka used one of these pseudonyms, it always had a certain significance and was not just a name. When researching these pseudonyms, it was discovered that Kirk Trammell was the same as Catherine Trammell, a character from the early 90s film Basic Instinct, portrayed by Sharon Stone. In the film, there is a scene where Sharon Stone's character, Catherine Trammell, has sex with a man who is bound to the bed with his hands. Then, Catherine Trammell kills him with an ice pick. Behind the bed, there is a window with stained glass. Additionally, in the film, Sharon Stone's character had an abusive partner named Manuel Vasquez. Exactly like this was the murder committed by Luka Magnotta, which was captured on camera. He also had sex with the victim, whose hands were tied to the bed, and then killed her with an ice pick. Instead of a stained glass window in front of the bed, there was a Casablanca poster. Furthermore, Manuel Manny Lopez was the prototype of the fictional Manuel Vasquez. All of this pointed to the fact that the film Basic Instinct had inspired the horrific crime committed by Luka Magnotta, something he had been planning for a long time. He was acting in real life as if he were in the film, and through all of this, he wanted to make a name for himself worldwide. What was truly horrifying was the fact that Luka Magnotta had been preparing this sick scenario and his defense strategy long before the murder ever took place. On December 15, 2014, the jury delivered its verdict. They found Luka Magnotta guilty of the murder of June Lin, dismembering her body, posting a video of the crime online, and sending the body parts across the country in packages. Following that, Quebec Superior Court Justice Guy Cournoyer sentenced him to life in prison. He will be eligible for parole after 25 years. I enjoyed strangling them during sex. I felt neither guilt nor moral because of it. I wanted to be the most famous serial killer in the world. For that, I had to kill as many people as possible. On August 15, 1982, the bodies of two women were found in the Green River, south of Seattle. Both had stones placed on them, probably to prevent them from being swept away by the current or floating to the water's surface. One of the victims' hand was on the water's surface and was waving as if calling for help. While examining the scene, law enforcement officers discovered the body of another woman lying face down on the bank between the creek and the highway. None of the three victims were wearing clothing or jewelry. About a mile from the scene, law enforcement officers found a woman's shirt that they believe may have belonged to one of the victims. There was also an eyewitness who saw a white man in a pickup truck on the shore while rafting, but he could not remember the color or model of the vehicle. To the police, the man driving a pickup truck was a very weak suspect to hold on to. David Riker, the head of the investigation, believed that once the bodies of the murdered men were examined, important information could be obtained for the investigation. So he asked pathologist Donald Ray for help. Examining the bodies, Ray found signs of violence on them and concluded that all the women were killed in the same way. He concluded that all 3 victims had been strangled with handcuffs. The bodies of the girls also showed signs of sexual intercourse. Although at that time it was impossible to identify people using human biological material, forensic experts still took samples of human biological material found on the bodies of the murdered people and stored them in a laboratory. The investigation suggested that the circumstances indicated that the murders were likely sexually motivated. A month before these murders, the bodies of 2 other girls were found in the same river, 800 meters from the crime scene. Their murder pattern was identical to that of the new killers. They were also completely naked, strangled by hand, and then thrown into the river. The head of the investigation, David Riker, believed that killing 5 girls in the same way in 3 weeks could mean only one thing: a serial killer had appeared in Seattle. One of the main objectives of the investigation was to identify the murdered girls. After studying police reports, dental records, and fingerprints of the missing girls, the investigation identified all 5 murdered girls. They were 16-year-old Wendy Caulfield, who ran away from home and then disappeared, 31-year-old mother of 3 children, Marcia Chapman, 23-year-old dancer Deborah Bonner, and friends Opal Mills, 16, and Cynthia Hands, 17. All murdered girls had one thing in common: they were involved in street prostitution along a 16-kilometer stretch of Pacific Highway near the Seattle airport. Given the lifestyle of the murdered girls, the investigation suggested that the killer offered the girls sex in exchange for money. He used this method to trick them and then strangled them during sex. The killer deliberately chose as victims girls with low social responsibility, whose disappearance went unnoticed. On September 25, 1982, law enforcement officers found the body of another girl, 17-year-old Giselle Lavorne, 16 kilometers from Green River. The girl had last been seen by her boyfriend in July, and since then, she had disappeared without a trace. Giselle was killed in the same way as the other girls. At the same time, police received information that 4 other girls were missing in the same neighborhood. The death toll rose to 6. The list of suspects was also growing. Suspects included drug dealers, customers, pickup truck drivers, and people who had been convicted of similar violent crimes in the past. It was necessary to narrow the search area. Reacher turned to an FBI expert psychologist to compile a psychological profile of the killer. However, the FBI's portrait of the serial killer was inaccurate. It was general descriptions such as white male, not a good worker, who changes jobs frequently, not very educated, etc. However, it was also indicated that the killer would try to make contact with the investigation, and the FBI hypothesized that the perpetrator might have offered himself as an informant for the investigation. Their suspicions were confirmed. A few weeks later, a man came to the police station and offered to help in the investigation. The strange person was Melvin Foster. Foster perfectly matched the killer's profile. He had been previously convicted, he knew the streets well, and he often dealt with sex workers on the highway. Melvin denied having a connection to the victims. Though he admitted that he knew these 5 girls, he recalled that he had met with these 5 girls. According to investigators, among the many suspects, Melvin Foster's profile most closely matched that of the serial killer. Chief Investigator David Reichert suggested a polygraph test to Foster, and Foster agreed. Even though polygraph results weren't admissible in court, Reichert hoped the test might still provide useful information for the investigation. A polygraph measures changes in the nervous system in reaction to questions. Its sensors track blood pressure, heart rate, respiration, and sweating. Melvin Foster denied he was the killer, but a polygraph test showed he was lying. The fact that Foster fit the description, knew the victims, and failed the polygraph test gave investigators enough probable cause to obtain a search warrant. Police searched his home near Olympia and also examined his vehicle. However, nothing was found during the search that linked Foster to the murders. And after 5 other girls disappeared while Foster was being followed, police realized that Foster could not be the serial killer they were looking for. 9 months after the investigation began, on May 8, 1983, another murder occurred. Police discovered the body of 21-year-old waitress Carol Christensen. She was not busy working on the highway, although she had last been seen hitchhiking on the Oceanside Highway. The body was found lying in a strange pose under an apple tree, with various items spread out on her. The victim had 2 trout on her body, a bottle of wine between her legs, and she was holding a pyramid-shaped piece of ham in her hands. The investigation suggested that the killer may have wanted to leave a message through this symbolic scene. The investigation suggested that the fish and wine may have been part of the Last Supper. They act as 5,000 believers being miraculously fed, and the body under the apple tree from Adam and Eve. The investigation suggested that in this scene, the killer was trying to say that women were the source of all mortal sins, and he was taking revenge on them. The investigation also revealed that because the crime scene and the murder itself were different from previous cases, they might have been dealing with more than one serial killer, and some investigators were convinced they were dealing with an imposter. They may even have known each other and acted in tandem. The frightened population was unhappy with the investigation. They accused the police of inaction because, despite many murders, they had failed to catch the serial killer. By mid-October 1983, the murder count had risen to 11. The killer began to throw the bodies of the murdered girls in new locations. Subsequent events took on an even more horrifying shape. In a deserted area near the airport, police found the half-decomposed body of a 19-year-old girl, Constance Naoni. The girl was last seen on June 8th as she was on her way to her home near the highway. But that wasn't the only discovery. Near where the girl's body was found, law enforcement officials discovered a cemetery. Some of the girls had been recently murdered, while others were in a semi-decomposed state. One of the dead, 18-year-old Mary Meehan, was 8 months pregnant. The number of girls killed has risen to 15, and police are still searching in vain for the 23 missing girls. In the months following the discovery of the bodies of the last murdered girls, law enforcement discovered 21 more bodies. Between October 1983 and April 1984, law enforcement officers discovered 21 bodies. The investigation team was already demoralized. But even in such despair, they were still hopeful that the crime scene would change everything, that they would find something that would connect all the facts and lead them to the serial killer. However, there was very little chance. The bodies were so decomposed that it was even difficult for the pathologist to determine the cause of death. Despite this, on decomposed bodies, the killer's handwriting was visible. The victims were young women wearing no clothes or jewelry. Most of those identified turned out to be sex workers who worked on the highway, but police were unable to find any other evidence. The killer hid the bodies of the murdered girls in increasingly remote and inaccessible locations. He did his best to cover his tracks and tried to prevent the police from finding the bodies of the murdered people soon, so that nature and animals would have enough time to do their thing. The police realized that they were dealing with a very clever and cunning serial killer who would not be easy to catch. In December 1984, a young girl named Rebecca Gard went to the police and reported shocking information. The girl was a former sex worker, and as the murdered girls, worked on Oceanside Highway. She told police that in November 1982, a young man took her and tried to strangle her during sex, but she managed to break free and escape. She did not report the incident to the police because she thought that no one would believe her because of her profession at the time. Rebecca thought that she managed to escape from the man known as the Green River Killer, and she believed that the information she provided would help the police catch the killer. There were also witnesses who the girl asked for help as she ran away and who saw the assailant's car. Some witnesses claim that the attacker's vehicle was a green pickup truck, while others say it was blue. But Rebecca Gard was sure it was a red pickup truck. Rebecca Gard identified the driver of the pickup truck that attacked her from a database provided by police. He turned out to be 35-year-old motorist Gary Ridgway. Police immediately arrested Gary Ridgway and transported him to the police station for questioning. Ridgway appeared to be a perfectly normal, calm, and balanced man who went to work every day and had a reputation as one of the best employees. He had been divorced several times, but generally gave the impression of being a normal, hardworking, and good person. Gary Ridgway admitted under questioning that he had a sexual relationship with Rebecca Gardy, but denied assaulting her. Police suspected him, but there was no reason to charge him with the murders. Ridgway also agreed to take a polygraph test, which showed that he was telling the truth while denying that he was the killer. Gary Ridgway was then released and removed from the list of suspects. The case stalled again, and the killings seemed to stop. The police considered every possible theory. They thought he might be a serial killer who had been arrested for another crime in another state and was serving time in prison. They also speculated that he might have died or been committed to a mental hospital. Soon, a new weapon was added to the investigation team. It was a computer which could process a large amount of information. And in difficult cases, as was the Green River murder, with more than 4,000 suspects and several rooms filled with case files, computers could provide significant assistance to the investigation. Law enforcement officers entered the Green River murder case data and the names of the suspects into the computer. After processing the information, it became clear that the same first and last name had been repeated many times in crimes committed in different states. That name was Gary Ridgway. As it turned out, he was arrested 3 years ago and was handled by different agencies at different times, but due to a lack of communication between the agencies, the case did not progress. According to information received, law enforcement officials revealed that Ridgway was arrested by the police in 1980 during a raid on sex workers. He was with the 3 missing girls, Kelly McGinnis, Kim Nelson, and Maria Molvar. It also emerged that he had access to several pickup trucks of different colors that eyewitnesses described. Law enforcement officials have set up 24-hour surveillance on Ridgway. The police discovered that Gary Ridgway knew exactly what was happening on the highway where sex workers worked. For example, a new girl on the highway would have immediately caught his attention. He was pretty well aware of who was working on the highway and who wasn't. He seemed to be morbidly obsessed with female sex workers. He often walked along the highway, watching the girls and waiting for his chance. Ridgway operated in his secret world and tried his best to remain undetected. He would suddenly appear on the highway and just as suddenly disappear like a ghost. When law enforcement accessed Ridgway's bank account, they discovered that he was filling up with gasoline at local gas stations near the crime scenes, and at the same time, the crimes were being committed. They also checked his work schedule at the factory where he worked. They also checked the dates of the girls' disappearances, and it turned out that he either had the day off or worked a different shift that day. His ex-wife also told law enforcement that Ridgway liked to have sex outdoors, and they would often go to the riverbank and woods to do that. Law enforcement asked Ridgway's ex-wife to show them the places they had been, and she told police the exact locations where the bodies of the murdered girls were found. Gary Ridgway was arrested by police for the second time. Despite all the circumstantial evidence, law enforcement still did not have decisive evidence that would allow them to charge Ridgway. So they searched his home, work, and car. The police searched every inch of Ridgway's home, workplace, and pickup truck, but found nothing. And without clear evidence, they could not take the case to trial, so they were forced to release Gary Ridgway. But before releasing Ridgway, the medical examiners subjected him to standard procedure and took a saliva sample. This sample was planned to be frozen and preserved until the day when DNA testing could prove Ridgway's innocence or guilt. 10 years had passed since the first murders, but the case of the Green River serial killer remained unsolved. The number of murdered girls had reached 43. The prime suspect, Gary Ridgway, had twice managed to get away with it. After exhausting all possibilities, the task force working on the case gradually disintegrated. Hopes of catching a serial killer began in 1997 when the former lead investigator on the case, David Riker, was appointed King County Sheriff. The case was his top priority. He formed a new investigative team and requested all archived investigative files. He believed it was possible to link some of the suspects to the murders using new methods of DNA analysis. His main hope was the human biological material found on the bodies of Marcia Chapman, Opal Mills, and Carol Christensen. Pathologists and a team from the Washington State Forensic Science Laboratory examined these samples using a state-of-the-art technique called short tandem repeat analysis. This analysis examined repetitive DNA sequences. A DNA molecule is a string of an infinite number of different sequences, where some of them are repeated over and over again. And it is these repetitive regions that create the profile of short tandem repeats. This profile is unique to each individual. In September 2001, the DNA results from the lab were delivered to Sheriff David Reichert's office. The DNA results showed that the biological material found on the bodies of Marcia Chapman, Opal Mills, and Carol Christensen was identical to Eggman's and belonged to the prime suspect in the investigation, Gary Ridgway. Based on this new information, police were certain that the Green River serial killer was Gary Ridgway. But they also realized that the road to justice would be long and that they needed to gather as much evidence against him as possible before going to trial. Law enforcement officers set up constant surveillance on Gary Ridgway while David Reichert's investigative team gathered new evidence against Gary Ridgway to present a complete picture in court. They acted in secret because leaking information about the impending arrest could damage the case. On November 15, 2001, while police were quietly following Gary Ridgway, they saw Ridgway go to the highway again in search of a new victim and offered to meet a policewoman disguised as a sex worker that same evening. For law enforcement, this meant that Ridgway was planning to commit another murder and needed to be neutralized immediately. Plainclothes cops spied him at the truck stop of the plant where he worked and arrested him when he finished his shift. Gary Ridgway, who was arrested, was taken to the police station where his belongings, home, and automobile were searched for evidence. Searches were conducted at his parents' home in SeaTac, his former homes on Pacific Highway, and his last residence. One of the most difficult tasks for the investigation started after his arrest, as they had to act quickly because time was limited. If a suspect is arrested, the prosecutor's office has a certain period to file charges. Otherwise, if the charges are not proven, the detainee must be released. Ridgway had the right to request a trial within 60 days, so the prosecution had to act quickly. Because their key piece of evidence, DNA, was weak, the defense could have asked for his release and argued that their client had contact with female sex workers and that his biological material found on the girls' bodies after such contact was completely natural. It wasn't enough for the prosecution, led by Jeff Bird, to simply link Ridgway to the 3 murders. He argued that the 3 murders were part of a long chain of murders that terrorized the community for more than a decade. He decided to reanalyze some of the evidence. He sent several items to the lab: Gary Ridgway's work coveralls, a piece of shirt found on one of the murdered girls, Debbie Abernathy, and a woman's shirt that belonged to the Green River Killer's first victim, Wendy Caulfield. Laboratory tests revealed tiny microscopic paint particles in the fabric of the clothing, the unique shape of which indicates that the paint was applied to the clothing using a spray gun. When a sprayer is used, the paint is sprayed into the air at high pressure, and the paint particles are deposited onto the fabric of the painter's clothing. And when that clothing comes in contact with another object, the paint particles are transferred to the object being touched. The prime suspect, Gary Ridgway, worked at the plant for 30 years as an auto painter. During his contact with the victims, the paint particles were transferred to them and remained on some of their bodies, even years later. The prosecution already had irrefutable evidence that Gary Ridgway was linked to the 7 murdered girls and that they were his victims. However, the only way to find out what happened to the other 40 murdered girls was if Gary Ridgway himself came forward. The prosecution offered the defense a deal: Gary Ridgway's life in exchange for information about the rest of the murdered girls and the whereabouts of the missing, since he was facing the death penalty. It was a very difficult deal, but if the prosecution rejected it, the whole truth would never be revealed, and the question of whether Gary Ridgway was the Green River Killer would remain unanswered. So the prosecution agreed to waive the death penalty for Gary Ridgway if Ridgway would confess to all the murders he committed over 20 years. In front of police video cameras, Gary Ridgway described his horrific crimes without the slightest remorse. He described how he strangled his victims during sex and the pleasure he derived from it. He said he strangled the girls with his hands and sometimes used their clothes or rope to do it. Ridgway was a ruthless serial killer who aspired to go down in American history as the most prolific serial killer of all time. He killed so many women that he couldn't remember the exact number. According to him, he killed more than 50 girls. He showed the police the places where he dumped the bodies of the murdered girls, which the police still did not know about. When law enforcement officers examined the locations he showed them, they found the bodies of 15-year-old Pammy Avant, 17-year-old April Boudarmy, 18-year-old Mary Jane Malvar, and another girl whose identity is still unknown. Gary Ridgway confessed to killing 49 girls. On December 18, 2003, King County Superior Court Judge Richard Jones sentenced Gary Ridgway to 49 years in prison without the possibility of parole. He was also sentenced to an additional 10 years in prison for falsification of evidence in each of the 49 murders. Evil originates in the darkest corners of the human mind. Its purpose is to derive pleasure from harming others, which often even includes taking someone's life. Horrific crime committed in 2019 is a prime example of such evil. People who commit such crimes lack empathy and remorse, as their main goal is to take pleasure from the suffering and destruction of others. Unfortunately, such evil is characteristic of many people, including those around us. On October 7, 2019, police in Fort Myers, Florida, received a call from the city's Mila Spa Salon reporting that a young man had argued with a girl and then assaulted her. Law enforcement officers arrived on the scene and found the girl, Melissa Montañez, severely beaten. Melissa told law enforcement that on the evening of the previous day, October 6th, she and her boyfriend, Wade Wilson, whom she had met 6 months earlier, had gone to the city's popular Buddha bar in her 2015 Dodge Helga car for drinks and music. Shortly after arriving at the bar, they argued the two as Wade wanted to go out and Melissa was adamantly against it. Angry Wade told Melissa he needed something out of her car and left. When Wade was late, Melissa left the bar to look for him, but she didn't find Wade outside and her car was nowhere to be seen. Melissa realized that Wade had taken her car and left her alone at the bar. She didn't want to go back to the bar alone and she didn't want to go home either, so she called her friend who picked her up and drove her home. Angry and emotionally drained, she soon fell asleep. According to her, she woke up at 8 a.m. and found that her phone had received several calls from an unknown number. After another ringtone, a girl answered the phone and it turned out to be her boyfriend, Wade Wilson, calling from an unknown number. He shouted angrily and demanded to see him immediately. Melissa knew Wilson's unstable character and his addiction to drugs, so she decided to meet him in a public place, the Mila Spa, at her work. For safety reasons, she took her friend with her. Wade arrived in a strange car, a black Nissan Versa. The girl asked where her car was. Instead of answering, Wade calmly asked the girl to get in the car. Melissa refused to get in the car, which dramatically escalated the situation. In anger, Wade grabbed Melissa by the hair and tried to force her into the car. The car was not on the handbrake and rolled under the hill. The wheels rolled on Melissa's legs and she fell, and Wade started beating her hard. After a long struggle, Melissa finally managed to free herself from Wade's grasp and ran to the nearest store to escape. Wade got into the strange car he arrived in and fled the scene. Melissa told law enforcement that she was introduced to Wade by a mutual friend 6 months ago. They lived together for only 2 months and then Wade was arrested for 3 months, but Melissa did not end the relationship. After his release, Melissa gave the guy a second chance. Even though she knew that Wade was violent and addicted to drugs, she still believed that he would quit drugs and things would change for the better. When police began to identify Wade Wilson, it was discovered that his parents were 14 or 15 years old when he was born. They were unable to raise him, and the child was adopted by the Wilson family, whom they met at church, who had 2 other daughters. According to the Wilsons, Wade was a rather difficult teenager. He was also described negatively by classmates who said Wade was expelled from school when he was in his senior year. When police checked his criminal record, they found that he often burglarized homes, broke cars, and also had several violent incidents on his record. After checking a database of phone numbers, law enforcement found that the foreign phone number from which Wade had called Melissa belonged to Christina Melton. It was from the neighboring town of Cape Coral. When Fort Myers police arrived at Christina Melton's home to find out where Wade Wilson got her phone from, they were met by officers from a neighboring jurisdiction. Christina Melton was brutally murdered. Her hands were tied, beaten with a curtain rod, and then strangled. A bloody ledge was next to the body, and the girl's mutilated body was wrapped in a plastic bag and her clothes. Law enforcement officials discovered that the girl owned a black Nissan automobile that was not in the garage. Based on the circumstances, police suspected that Wade Wilson had arrived at Melissa in Christina's car and began searching for the vehicle. Approximately 5 miles from the scene, Fort Myers police officer Tim McCormick noticed a car near the restaurant that matched the description of the wanted car. The officer called for backup. He yelled to Wade Wilson, who was sitting in the car, to get out of the vehicle. But Wade disobeyed his order, started the car, and managed to get away. Shortly after Wade Wilson escaped, businessman Joshua Lewis called the police to report that his former employee, Wade Wilson, had come to him and asked for money. When he refused to help, an angry Wade told him that he had killed people, stolen one of the victim's cars, and needed the money to get away. Joshua secretly went outside and called 911. Police soon arrived on the scene, but Wade was gone. During the search for Wade Wilson, law enforcement received another information that the 45-year-old mother of two, Diane Ruiz, was being looked for. The woman worked at a restaurant, and when she did not show up at work, restaurant management contacted her family, but she was not also at home. According to family members, Diane was last seen 15 hours ago when she left for work. After reviewing surveillance footage, police discovered that a Nissan stolen by Wade Wilson had been spotted in the area at the same time Diane disappeared. After several hours of searching, law enforcement officers found Diana Ruiz's body in the woods of Cape Coral. She had been brutally murdered. The woman had likely been strangled, resulting in a broken neck. The body also showed signs of having been run over several times by a car. As a result of the beating, her nose and fingers were broken, her chest was damaged, and her ribs were broken. Later that evening, police received encouraging information. Law enforcement contacted Wade's biological father, Stephen Testaseca, and asked if Wade called him to report the matter to the police. He told law enforcement that Wade had called him some time ago asking for money and told him a story that he did not believe because Wade often lied to him to extort money. Wade told his father that he met two girls at a bar. Then they went to his relative's house to have fun, stayed there for a while, and then Wade and the girls went to one of the girls' houses where they continued to have a party. At daybreak, when one of the girls had gone to work and the other had gone to bed, he struck the sleeping girl several times with a ledge and then strangled her. He wrapped the dead body in a package and wanted to get into his car and drive away, but he could not pick it up because the corpse had already started to decompose. If the body burned, it became heavy and stiff, so he left it there and ran away in the victim's car. On the way, he asked a stranger how he could get to his desired location. A woman was also headed in that direction, and Wilson offered to drive her, but on the way, he brutally beat and strangled her. He then drove to the woods where he could get rid of the body. After pulling the woman out of the car, he realized she was still breathing, threw her to the ground, and ran over her several times with his car. Wilson's father also told law enforcement that Wade was hiding in a stranger's home whose residents had gone on vacation. Law enforcement officers surrounded the house where Wade Wilson was hiding and demanded his surrender through a megaphone. During a lengthy negotiation, Wilson called his biological father and, after speaking with him, surrendered to the police. Wade Wilson was charged with 2 first-degree murders, as well as causing bodily harm, criminal trespassing, and vehicle theft. The state prosecutor filed a motion with the court to deny Wade Wilson bail. Wilson confessed to the murders of Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz. He said he met Christine Melton at a bar, then beat her with a curtain rod while sleeping, and then strangled in her home. He also admitted that he tricked Diane Ruiz into getting into his car and then beat and strangled her. As he was pulling the body out, he realized that the woman was still breathing and ran her over several times with his car. Wilson justified that at the time of the crimes, he was in a serious mental state and under the influence of drugs. Due to numerous motions and postponements, Wilson's trial dragged on for quite some time. During this time, Wade Wilson's appearance changed significantly, and he had several tattoos with Nazi symbols on his face. New crimes committed in prison were also added to his charges. According to court documents, Wade attempted to carry out his escape plan on September 30, 2020, but a fellow inmate told prison guards that Wade had written a letter to inmate Joseph Katz asking for help in the escape, which was scheduled to take place at 1 a.m. The letters taken by the investigation were irrefutable evidence that Wade had been working out his escape plan in detail. Wilson and Katz were also associated with a prison gang known as the Merciless, who were white racists. The investigation also revealed that this was not just an escape plan from prison, it was a grand plan for a large-scale escape. Law enforcement officials also discovered the location where the inmates were going to escape from. In one of the cells, the bars on a metal window were broken, and the thick glass had cracks. These cracks indicated that Wilson and Katz had worked out an escape plan in detail. The cell also contained a movable chair attached to the concrete floor, which was probably used to break the glass. The investigation soon determined that Wilson was the organizer of the escape. He has added another charge for organizing the escape. However, that was not all. On April 20th, 2023, police officers checked the perimeter of the prison and found a bag full of contraband. The bag contained cigarettes, lighters, and a large amount of methamphetamine. According to forensic evidence, an influential inmate who had special privileges in the prison gave the bag to Wade Wilson and another inmate. After checking phone records, police determined that Wilson had been in contact with one Bonnie Wiggin about the aforementioned amphetamine. Police launched an investigation that resulted in the arrest of 6 people, including Wade Wilson. In addition to drug dealing, Wade Wilson and Joseph Katz were also associated with the criminal group the Merciless. The Merciless was formed in 1986 in a Florida prison and is considered one of the largest white racist groups in American prisons. According to the Anti-Defamation League, members of the Merciless group use the numerical code 21 to 212, where the number 21 stands for unity, 2 for brotherhood, and 12 for loyalty. The group is known for its strict code of conduct and brutality, and the fact that Wilson and Katz were associated with the group raises serious questions about the extent of their influence and potential threat. Wade Wilson has also become very popular in the community, and not just because of the horrible crimes he has committed, but the fact that he was named after the real name of Deadpool, the villainous character from the popular 1993 New Mutants comic book, hence the nickname Deadpool the Killer. In the weeks leading up to Wilson's sentencing, the media hype surrounding his case attracted the attention of many women. Despite his violent crimes, Wilson received countless love letters from women across the country. Numerous letters were also sent to Judge Nicholas Thompson in the Wade Wilson case, in which women begged for Wilson's life. The woman from Visalia, California, wrote to the judge and swore eternal devotion to Wilson. She said that as a person was worrying about Wade, he had given serious thought to the gravity of the situation and the possible consequences, and asked the judge to carefully consider his decision. One woman, a mother of 2, wrote that Wilson was a completely different person when he was on medication, and instead of facing trial, he asked for treatment. All of this brings us to the question of how convicted murderer Wade Wilson has had such an impact on so many women. This phenomenon is not simply the result of curiosity. It is based on the complexities of human behavior and societal influences that are both fascinating and disturbing. This condition is called hybristophilia. It is a condition in which people feel sexually attracted to individuals who have committed serious crimes. This phenomenon is often referred to as Bonnie and Clyde syndrome. Hybristophilia is not a new phenomenon, but the case of Wade Wilson has brought it to unprecedented public attention. This is exactly the situation many women find themselves in, which leads to the mass adoration of Wilson. One of the key psychological factors for them is the appeal of risk. For some women, the idea of intimacy with a dangerous man like Wade Wilson is exciting and appealing. The feeling gives them an adrenaline that is not often experienced in everyday life. The search for such feelings explains why people turn to extreme sports or other risky activities. The risk itself becomes a source of attraction. Wilson's horrific crimes, his looks, facial features, and piercing blue eyes are what many women find attractive. This attraction is often linked to a desire to break social norms and experience the forbidden. Mass culture often romanticizes the bad guy type, making him even more attractive to those who are attracted to him. The role of media in Wilson's case plays a significant role in all of this. During the trial, Wilson was often described as a calm, reserved, and even charming man. This has led some women to believe that he is not as dangerous as he seems. They see him as a confused young man who deserves a second chance. Social media has taken the obsession with Wade Wilson to an unprecedented level. Platforms like Instagram, X, and TikTok are full of fan pages dedicated to Wilson. These pages post photos of him, court sketches, and even excerpts from letters he sent from prison. Social media allows women in love with him to connect and share their opinions. Women have been known to quit their jobs, leave their families, and move to live near the prison where Wade Wilson is being held to be closer to him. They also send him expensive gifts, cover his legal fees, and even propose marriage to him. Ironically, Wilson is adored by so many women, even though he brutally murdered 2 women just because he felt like it. At trial, the prosecution presented real evidence against Wilson. The results of the forensic examination of Christina Melton's apartment, including DNA traces on the curtain rod, painted a horrific picture of the violence she had suffered. Forensic expert testimony about the injuries on Diane Ruiz's body further emphasized the brutality of Wilson's actions. The discovery of Ruiz's blood, her cell phone, and her service identification card in Melton's stolen car linked the 2 murders and demonstrated the chronology of events. Wade Wilson's father, Stephen Testasoka, also testified against his son. The defense did not deny many of the details of the case, but they asked for reducing the sentence, arguing that the defendant had mental health issues. After Wilson's medical tests, neurologist Mark Rubina gave shocking testimony to the court via Zoom. He reported that a recent scan of Wilson's head revealed severe brain damage. The scan results showed impaired short-term memory and cognitive and emotional problems that manifested themselves against a backdrop of mental illness. He said Wilson's past was full of severe incidents that could have affected his current mental state. Wade told Rubin about 2 car accidents. In one case, he was a passenger when the driver crashed into an oak tree and Wilson hit his head on the windshield. On the second occasion, he and his friends crashed into a tree on the beach. Everyone lost their mind, except Wade. Fearing that his parole would be jeopardized, he fled the scene without even calling for medical help. Wade also revealed that he suffered 2 concussions while playing soccer and baseball during his senior year. He also mentioned that he was beaten 3 times before losing consciousness. Although neurologist Mark Rubina did not have medical records to back up these claims, based on his analysis, he believed that Wilson's story was likely true. Mark Rubina also emphasized that he was a neurologist, not a psychologist, but argued that Wilson's brain injuries and mental illness explained his impulsive behavior and display of strong emotions. Wade Wilson's defense team, led by attorneys Kevin Shirley and Lee Hollander, used these findings to save Wilson's life. They hoped that evidence of Wade's mental illness would influence Judge Nicholas Thompson's decision. The prosecution's expert, forensic psychologist Michael Herkov, noted that there was insufficient evidence to make a diagnosis of psychotic disorder. Instead, Herkov stated that a more plausible explanation for Wilson's egregious behavior was his long-term drug use. On June 10, 2024, and in 2024, the trial against Wade Wilson began in the state of Florida. After about 2 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. By a vote of 8-4, the jury found Wade Wilson guilty of all charges, including the first-degree murder of Christina Melton and Diane Ruiz. Under the new death penalty law signed by Governor Ron DeSantis in April 2023, Florida's death penalty rules changed. The new law replaced the unanimous consent required for a jury to decide with an 8-vote majority. On August 24, 2024, Judge Nicholas Thompson sentenced Wade Wilson to 2 death sentences. On August 30th, Wilson was transferred from the Lee County Jail to death row at the prison in Rayford, Florida. At this time, a date for his execution has not yet been set. In the 1980s, a series of horrific murders took place in Rostov-on-Don and the surrounding Rostov region. The victims were brutally murdered and their bodies were severely mutilated. They suffered multiple stab wounds, some had body parts bitten or consumed, while others had their internal organs removed. There were also signs of strangulation, and most had been sexually assaulted. Among the victims were young women and children. The youngest was a 7-year-old boy. On December 22, 1978, the body of a 9-year-old girl, Elena Zakotnova, was discovered under a footbridge in the Mezhevo settlement on the bank of the Grushevka River. The girl had been suffocated and her eyes were covered with a scarf. Her backpack was later discovered downstream. Classmates revealed that the day before, Elena Zakotnova had left class early as she was in a hurry to go somewhere. An eyewitness, Gorenkova, reported seeing the girl before murder. She informed law enforcement that she had seen the girl at a bus stop in the evening. Standing next to her was a tall, well-dressed man wearing glasses and a top hat, speaking with her before they left together. Gorenkova provided the police with a detailed description of the man's appearance, leading to the creation of a sketch of the alleged suspect. The photo depicts a local teacher, Andrei Chikatilo, who had recently purchased an old house in the village of Medjevo, near where the girl's body was discovered. The police arrested Chikatilo and brought him to the station for questioning. During questioning, Chikatilo insisted that he had nothing to do with Elena Zakotnova's murder. He also claimed that he had been at home at the time of the girl's murder, a statement confirmed by his wife, who was the dormitory commandant at the same school where Chikatilo worked. Believing his alibi to be reliable, the police released Andrei Chikatilo. Meanwhile, investigators pursued other leads. They examined criminal archives and searched for individuals suspected or convicted of similar crimes. It was soon discovered that 25-year-old Alexander Kravchenko, previously convicted of the rape and murder of a minor, lived near the river where the girl's body was found. The police immediately arrested Kravchenko. During a search of his home, stolen items belonging to his neighbors were discovered in the attic. Kravchenko initially denied killing the girl, but after some time, he confessed to murdering Elena Zakotnova. As a result, the court sentenced him to death, the highest penalty in effect in the Soviet Union at the time. On September 3, 1981, the police received a report that the body of a naked girl had been discovered on the left bank of the Don River, 50 meters from the highway. When police officers arrived, they were met with a horrifying scene. The girl had been brutally beaten with a stick, and the bloodied weapon lay beside her. There were signs of strangulation on the victim's neck, her mouth had been stuffed with dirt, and one of her breasts had been partially eaten. The victim was identified as 17-year-old boarding school student Larisa Tkachenko. The autopsy revealed that she had first been severely beaten with a stick and then strangled by hand. On June 12, 1982, 13-year-old Lyuba Biryuk vanished. Her mother had sent her to a neighboring village for groceries, but she never returned home. Her mutilated body was discovered in a forest strip along the Novocherkassk-Bagaevskaya highway. Her head had been hacked. She had been sustained more than 40 stab wounds to the neck, chest, and arms, and her eyes had been gouged out. On September 8, 1982, 19-year-old Irina Karabelnikova left home after a quarrel with her parents and was never seen again. Her body was discovered in the woods halfway between Rostov-on-Don and the Shakhnaya Railroad On September 15, 1982, 16-year-old Sergei Kuzmin ran away from school due to bullying by his classmates. His body was discovered in a wooded area between the Kirpichny and Shakti railroad stations. On December 11, 1982, 10-year-old Olga Stalmakenko left for music school but never returned home. Her body was discovered in a field on a state farm near Novoshakhtinsky. The killer had cut out the girl's heart with a knife. In July 1983, 13-year-old Irina Dunenkova, a teenager with oligophrenia, went missing. Her body was discovered in Aviator Park. Another woman, 24-year-old mother of two, Lyudmila Kashuba, went missing in July. Her mutilated body was discovered in a wooded area between Kirpichny and Shakti stations. On September 4, 1983, the naked body of another girl was discovered on the outskirts of Novoshakhtinsky, but the police were unable to identify her. The police were now certain that all the murders bore the same signature. The killer first sexually assaulted the victim, then strangled her, stabbed her multiple times in the body and genitals, and, in some cases, cut open her internal organs. It was clear to them that a brutal serial killer was operating in the region, but neither the police nor the media revealed or reported it, as strict Soviet censorship made it impossible to publicly acknowledge the presence of a serial killer in the country. The prosecutor's office of the Rostov region established an investigative and operational group tasked with solving the murders. The investigative team suspected that the murderer might be mentally ill and pursued this theory. 100 kilometers from Rostov, in the town of Zverevo, there was a psychoneurological boarding school. Lacking any real leads, the Soviet police began accusing its patients of murdering children and women. This investigation was unofficially dubbed the Case of the Fools. Soon after, a 20-year-old patient of the institution, Valery Shaburov, who had been diagnosed with oligophrenia, was arrested. During interrogation, he admitted to murdering children and women and named an accomplice who was also a patient at the psychiatric hospital. He also provided investigators with the names of several other accomplices. All the detainees wrote confessions and pleaded guilty, even to murders committed after their arrest. To make this version more plausible, the Soviet police brought in new patients from the boarding school, whom they believed were continuing the series of murders to deflect suspicion from their already arrested accomplices. The accused consistently confused details in their testimony, failed to name the exact crime locations, and were unable to describe the victims' appearances. They periodically recanted their confessions, claiming that the police had forced them to sign false statements under pressure from fellow inmates. Ultimately, the investigation, unofficially known as the Case of the Fools, collapsed due to gross misconduct by law enforcement. A criminal case was opened against them, but after several months, it was closed due to a lack of evidence. Meanwhile, the murders continued. A serial killer and sexual sadist who preyed on women and children was still active in Rostov and the Rostov region. The case was escalated to the highest levels of authority. The Central Committee of the Communist Party took control of the murder investigation and launched one of the largest operations in Soviet history to catch the serial killer. The special operation was named Forest Strip because the mutilated bodies of the victims were found in forest strips and woodlands. Isaac Ostoyev oversaw the operation while Viktor Burakov led the special task force. Shortly after the launch of Forest Strip on October 27, 1983, the mutilated body of 19-year-old Vera Shevkun, with both breasts removed, was discovered in a forest belt near Shakti. On December 27th, the body of Sergei Markov was discovered with approximately 70 stab wounds and genital mutilation. Investigators found Group 4 human biological material on his body. On January 9, 1984, the body of 17-year-old Natalia Shalopanina was discovered in Aviator Park with 27 stab wounds. On February 21st, 44-year-old Marta Ryabenko became one of the serial killer's victims. Her body was found in Aviator Park. Both her breasts had been mutilated and her uterus was removed. Marta Ryabenko was the oldest of the serial killer's known victims at that time. The investigation of the Forest Lane case became complicated. To create a psychological profile of the killer, the task force consulted psychiatrist Alexander Bukhanovsky. He described the maniac as calm, intelligent, and family-oriented who could be heterosexual or impotent. According to his conclusion, the maniac used a knife as a substitute for a sexual organ and took his victim's intimate parts as trophies. Although the psychiatrist's profile was detailed, it did not significantly aid the investigation. However, the investigation team had enough evidence to identify the perpetrator's signature. The investigation concluded that the murders were sexually motivated. However, out of 23 victims, only 4 boys had been directly raped. In the cases of the girls and women, the killer's biological material was found in only 1 of the 18 victims. The investigation was hindered by the lack of witnesses. The investigation proceeded using the process of elimination. First, they needed to determine several key directions of the serial killer's movements. The perpetrator could be identified based on psychological traits, physical characteristics, or professional background. He frequently traveled by electric train on the Novoshaktinsky-Shakt-Rostov route, as the highest number of bodies had been found along that line. It was possible that he was a railroad employee. Bodies were also discovered near highways, so drivers and motorists were considered suspects as well. The professionalism with which the maniac tortured his victims raised suspicions that he might have been a professional doctor, possibly driven by sinister scientific motives. The criminal's professional cover-up led investigators to suspect that the maniac might have been a police officer. The investigation mapped the locations where the bodies were discovered and used this information to try to determine the serial killer's travel routes and to uncover where he lived, worked, and whom he associated with. It became clear that the maniac held a job that required frequent train travel. According to the route map created by the investigation, all roads led to the Rostov Centralny station and further along the railroad line to Novoshaktinsky. Police officers and volunteers monitored all public places where the criminal might appear. They stopped numerous individuals, checked their documents, and followed and contacted suspicious persons, but to no avail. At the end of 1986, the investigation launched a new operation called Monoki. They attempted to catch the criminals using live baiting, with policewomen posing as beggars, drunks, or sex workers. Similar operations had been carried out in crowded areas such as airports and train stations. However, this method of capturing the maniac was unsuccessful. Many murders also occurred near highways, and it was suggested that the serial killer could have been a truck or bus driver. As part of the investigation, blood type tests were taken from 165,000 drivers, but they yielded no results. It was horrific, but the Soviet police also used teenagers as live bait, as homosexuals were among the main groups of suspects. The file for the special operation Forest Strip gradually grew, covering more than 300,000 individuals. During the investigation of these murders, 1 through 62 other criminal cases, including sexual offense cases, were opened in parallel, but the person sought by the investigation was nowhere to be found. In late August 1984, while on duty at a railway station, 2 policemen, Zanosovsky and Akhmadkanov, noticed a man wandering around the hall. He approached young girls and tried to make contact with them. They found the man's actions suspicious and started following him. When the stranger could do nothing at the station and all the girls avoided talking to him, he left the station. The police silently followed him. The unknown man changed multiple forms of transport, walked through many streets and parks, but did not engage with anyone, so he returned to the train station and sat on a bench in the waiting room. Suddenly, the policeman saw a girl sitting next to him. The stranger started talking to her. After a while, the girl put her head on the man's lap. The police believed that the unknown man's appearance and behavior matched those of the wanted serial killer and decided to continue surveillance to see if he took the girl, who clearly seemed to be a sex worker. The police managed to overhear their conversation, during which the man arranged to meet her an hour later in the market area. The police met the strange man arriving for the meeting and arrested him. The arrested man turned out to be Andrei Chikatilo. During the search, Vaseline, ropes, wires, and a knife with bloodstains were found in his briefcase. The police assumed that these were all murder weapons. Andrei Chikatilo was sentenced to 3 months of pretrial detention and began to check his alibi for the moments of the crime. 2 police officers were placed in the cell with him to help establish his involvement in the murders. However, in their conversation, Chikatilo did not say anything suspicious that would confirm his involvement in the murders. Only one of his questions was strange. He wondered whether it was possible for the investigation to establish the identity of the maniac by traces of blood and biological material. By that time, the investigation already had the results of human biological material found in the victims, forensic experts, and criminalists' results, which showed that the serial killer had a 4th blood type. When Chikatilo's blood type was checked, it turned out that he had type 2. So the police released Andrei Chikatilo from custody. Since 1986, the serial killer suddenly stopped killing, and there was silence. However, starting in 1987, he resumed his series of gruesome murders. The operational group discovered the body of an unknown woman near the town of Krasny Sulin. The nature of the murder left no doubt that the Rostov maniac had returned. On July 31, 1987, the body of 12-year-old Ivan Bilovetsky was found. He had suffered multiple stab wounds, and his mouth was stuffed with earth. On May 17, 1988, the body of a 9-year-old boy, Alexei Voronko, was found in a forest near Ilovaisk. His genitals had been cut off and his stomach had been cut open. On April 11, 1989, the body of 15-year-old Yevgeny Muratov was found in the woods near the Leskos Railroad. The boy had been tied up with a rope, his tongue had been cut off, and his stomach had been cut open. On March 9, 1989, the dismembered body of 16-year-old Tatiana Rizhova was found in a sewage well. Her limbs and head had been severed, and the severed body parts were wrapped individually in newspapers. On July 14, 1989, 8-year-old Alexander Diakonov disappeared from his yard. His body was found in the woods near the railroad station with numerous stab wounds and cut genitalia. On September 1, 1989, the body of Yelena Varga, an 18-year-old student and mother of a 2-year-old child, was found in the woods near the Krasnoznamenka railway station. She had both breasts and cheeks cut off and her uterus removed. On August 28, 1989, 10-year-old Alexei Kobatov disappeared without a trace. The police were unable to find any trace of him. On July 28, 1990, 13-year-old Viktor Petrov disappeared from Rostov Station, where he was with his mother. He went to drink water and did not return. His mutilated body was found in the Rostov Botanical Garden. On August 17, 1990, in the reeds near the beach in Novocherkassk, the police found the body of an 11-year-old boy, Ivan Fomin. The nature of the murder was the same. The body had multiple wounds, and the genitals had been cut. The boy had gray hair tangled in the fingers of his right hand. The horrible list of murdered people grew day by day, and it seemed that no one and nothing could stop the brutal serial killer. With his horrific actions, it seemed as though he was mocking the investigation, making it clear that he would never be caught. The police had constant control over the railroad. The larger stations were controlled by uniformed officers, while the smaller stations were controlled by agents in civilian clothes. The investigation believed that where there were uniformed police officers, the maniac would not risk committing a crime and would choose a smaller station to look for his next victim. On November 6, 1990, Sergeant Igor Rybakov was on duty at the Leskos railway station. He saw a well-dressed man coming out of the forest near the railway station. The stranger seemed very suspicious to him, as people mostly went to the woods for mushrooms, but this man, unlike them, was not dressed appropriately. He stopped the stranger, introduced himself as a police sergeant, and asked to see his ID. The unknown man turned out to be Andrei Chikatilo. Rybakov wrote down his name and surname, after which he let the man go. On November 13th, the body of 22-year-old Svetlana Korostik was found in the woods near the railway branch of the Leskos. Numerous stab wounds were found on her body, along with cuts on her tongue and both breasts. Kostoyev, head of the investigation, believed that because the railway station was controlled by the police, the perpetrator could not have gone unnoticed. Whoever was on duty at the station that day must have seen the serial killer. This is how Sergeant Rybakov's report ended up on Kostoyev's desk, where he read the name Andrei Chikatilo, which he already knew. In re-examining the case file, investigators found that Chikatilo had been repeatedly prosecuted in recent years in connection with serial murders. Witnesses also described a man who resembled Chikatilo as being involved in the murder of 16-year-old Viktor Tishenko, whose body had been found a few days earlier near the same location where Svetlana Korostik's body had been discovered. The day before the murder, Viktor had bought tickets at the train station. The cashier remembered not only the boy, but also the man with high glasses standing behind him in line. When questioned again, the cashier recalled that her daughter had mentioned several times the strange man whom she regularly saw on the Elektrichka. According to her, one day, the girl and her friend witnessed an unusual scene. When the man approached the teenager, he introduced himself as an acquaintance of his mother and asked him to get off together at the next station. However, the boy ignored him, jumped out of the carriage, and disappeared into the crowd. Investigators contacted the personnel department of Chikatilo's former service to find out whether he had been on a business trip to Uzbekistan in the summer of 1984 or to Moscow in the summer of 1985. Not far from Tashkent and near Moscow's Domodedovo airport, the bodies of two women and a girl had been found with injuries similar to those on the bodies in Rostov. It turned out that Andrei Chikatilo had been in these regions at the same time as the murders occurred. Thus, the investigation had no doubt that the serial killer was Andrei Chikatilo. Despite this, the investigators decided not to arrest him immediately. They chose to keep an eye on him, hoping he might attempt another murder so they could arrest him in the act, making the investigation easier. During surveillance, the police saw Chikatilo attempting to engage with children and young women, although he did not take any active steps. Once, during another surveillance operation, Chikatilo was nearly hit by a car right in front of the police. The investigation had been searching for Chikatilo for several years, and it was too dangerous to risk his life in such an unforeseen situation. Therefore, the investigators decided to arrest him. On November 20th, Chikatilo left work earlier than usual and went to the hospital because of an injury to his finger, which was painful. He returned home from the hospital, took a 3-liter can, and went to a beer store. He was arrested by the police as he was leaving the store. During a search of his apartment, the police found 23 kitchen knives, a hammer, a bag containing rope, a knife, and Vaseline. Scratches were found on Chikatilo's face, and there were injuries to his index finger during medical examination. A forensic expert later determined that the scratches were caused by human fingernails, and the finger injury was the result of a human bite. Re-examination revealed that Chikatilo had the 4th blood type. It turned out that the experts had made a mistake in checking his blood type during the previous arrest. To cover up this mistake or negligence, the police spread a rumor called on-paradoxical separation, which suggested that a person's blood type and biological material could be different. Despite all this, the evidence for the investigation was not enough to formally charge Chikatilo. The investigators had only 10 days to get a confession from him. Kostoyev interrogated the suspect for several hours, but Chikatilo stubbornly denied his involvement in the murders. On the 9th day of the interrogation, investigator Kostoyev decided to focus on Chikatilo's mental state and, using this approach, attempted to make him confess. During the conversation, the investigator told Chikatilo that if he proved he was mentally ill at the time of the murders, he would be cured and the death penalty would be avoided. Kostoyev's trick worked. Chikatilo liked the idea of being mentally ill and agreed to see a psychiatrist. After a 3-hour conversation with psychiatrist Alexander Bukanovsky, Andrei Chikatilo confessed to all the murders he had committed. According to Chikatilo's confession, he committed his first murder on December 22, 1978, Kostoyev was surprised, as this murder was not even in the investigation materials. Upon checking the information, Kostoyev discovered that a completely different person, Alexander Kravchenko, had been convicted and sentenced to death for this murder. The case materials revealed that a police officer had been in the same cell as the accused. This officer constantly used physical violence against Kravchenko and forced him to confess to the murder, which he did not commit. It turned out that while the agent was in the cell, Kravchenko confessed, but as soon as he was transferred to another location, he retracted his confession in court, stating that he had been coerced and tortured. It was later found that on the night when Elena Zakotnova was killed, Alexander Kravchenko had been drinking at home with his wife and a friend. However, the Soviet police were eager to find the murderer and rapist quickly. Therefore, the women were intimidated and forced to write testimonies stating that Kravchenko had gone out that evening to buy a drink and returned covered in blood. In February 1979, Kravchenko was sentenced to 15 years in prison. However, Elena Zakotnova's relatives demanded the harshest punishment. The case was returned 3 times for additional investigation, and finally, in July 1983, Alexander Kravchenko was sentenced to death. In Kravchenko's last letter, sent to the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet with a request for a pardon, he wrote, "The day will come when everyone will know that you executed an innocent man, and you will be ashamed. They tortured me into confessing to a murder I did not commit. They gave false testimony against me and forced me to confess to the murder." It was also suspicious that Chikatilo somehow managed to avoid murder charges. According to one theory, Chikatilo was unofficially a police agent or informant, keeping an eye on the investigation. When he realized that the investigation was escalating and that they could be closing in on him, he stopped the murders. As a result, there were periods when he did not kill anyone for several months. His last victim was 22-year-old Svetlana Korostik. Chikatilo took her to the forest near the Leskos railway station and attempted to have sex with her, but was unsuccessful, and Svetlana laughed at him. In response, he stabbed her with a knife, cut off part of her tongue, and swallowed it. He then severed both of her breasts and discarded them in the forest. Afterward, he returned to the train station where he came across Police Sergeant Igor Rybakov, who checked his identification and included his name in that day's report. Initially, Andrei Chikatilo was formally charged with the murder and rape of 35 people. He not only confessed to the aforementioned crimes, but also told investigators about 20 more murders that had not previously been connected to the series of murders he had committed. Investigators needed to obtain evidence for each crime before sending the case file to trial. They interrogated Chikatilo daily and visited the crime scenes with him. During one of the interrogations, he stated that he had dug a grave in the cemetery where he had buried one of the boys he had killed and showed the investigators the location. The body that was thought to be missing was found in the grave. This fact became one of the strongest pieces of evidence of Chikatilo's guilt, because without such detailed testimony, proving the charge would have been difficult. Chikatilo could only provide information to investigators that was already known to the public. Investigators needed precise details and circumstances of the murders, such as information about the injuries inflicted on the victims' bodies, which had not been publicly disclosed. Chikatilo's precise knowledge of these details proved his guilt. There were also witnesses who saw and identified Chikatilo at several murder scenes. When investigators asked Chikatilo why he cut up the organs of his victims, he replied that he ate them because he had heard that such an act increases a person's sexual potency. Chikatilo believed that he would be recognized as insane and avoid capital punishment. He underwent 3 forensic psychiatric examinations, 1 in Rostov and 2 in Moscow, at the Serbsky Institute of Forensic Psychiatry. The psychiatrists diagnosed him with organic personality disorder, the symptoms of which include unmotivated aggression and loss of the ability to control impulses and behavior. However, he was recognized as was mentally healthy, and it was determined that Chikatilo was aware of the consequences of his horrific actions, but there was a question. If Chikatilo was mentally healthy, how can we explain the brutality with which he treated his victims? Psychiatrists argue that a person with such a disorder could not answer the question of why he would commit such horrible acts because he would lack a rational motive. Psychiatrists have tried to find an explanation for Chikatilo's horrible acts in his past, the environment he grew up in, and the influences of his childhood and adolescence on him. There are many rumors about Chikatilo's past which are almost impossible to verify. He was born on October 16, 1936, in the Kharkov region of Ukraine to Roman and Anna Chikatilo. He is said to have had congenital hydrocephalus, which causes headaches and visual deterioration. It is also claimed that his mother beat him constantly because Chikatilo suffered from urinary incontinence. With the outbreak of World War II, Chikatilo's father was drafted to the front. At this time, the village where Andrei and his mother lived was occupied by the Germans. It is said that Chikatilo witnessed the atrocities committed by the Nazis, including the shooting of children. According to one rumor, when German soldiers were shooting children, Chikatilo fell and hit his head on a rock. When he regained consciousness, he found himself lying in a pit full of corpses. It is also rumored that Chikatilo's mother was raped by German soldiers, as a result of which she became pregnant and gave birth to a baby girl. Chikatilo's story also mentions his older brother Stepan, who Chikatilo himself claimed was eaten by hungry villagers during the famine of 1933. However, there is no evidence to confirm Stepan's existence or death. It is assumed that this terrible story was invented by his parents to keep little Andrei from straying far from home. As for his younger years, Chikatilo recalled that one day his sister's friend visited. He was already a high school student, liked the girl very much, and tried to have sex with her, but nothing worked. The failure of his first attempt to have sex affected him so much that he later wrote in one of his notes that he would never have sexual relations with any woman except his wife. At the age of 26, Chikatilo met his future wife, Faina. A few years later, they had 2 children, a girl, Lyudmila, and a boy, Yuri. Later, Faina told the investigation that they had sex very rarely, about once every 2-3 months. For the last 6-7 years before Chikatilo's arrest, they had no sexual relations at all. The trial of Andrei Chikatilo began in April 1992. During the trial, he sat in a cage with bars specially built for him in the courtroom, where he was led through a tunnel from the basement. Because it was dangerous to lead him to the bench through the hall where the relatives of the murdered were seated, the famous court footage clearly shows how Chikatilo changed. When he realized that he could not escape the death penalty, his previously unremarkable, bespectacled, calm image disappeared, and he began to relentlessly demonstrate his inferiority. He took off his clothes in the courtroom and showed his genitals to those around him, swearing, joking, insulting everyone, shouting, and threatening. Nevertheless, Chikatilo managed to undergo a repeated psychiatric examination, although the results were the same as the previous ones. On October 15, 1992, Andrei Chikatilo was found guilty of 52 murders and sentenced to death. After sentencing, he was transferred to Novocherkassk prison. Before his execution, Chikatilo was very concerned about his health and took care of it as much as possible. He did not smoke, exercised, and ate well. In addition, he wrote numerous complaints against the judge and the investigation to the authorities and central newspapers, and also appealed to Russian President Boris Yeltsin with a request for a pardon. However, on January 4, 1994, his final petition was rejected. On the evening of February 14th of the same year, Chikatilo was taken to the place of execution in a UAZ car, accompanied by 2 guards, and shot.